The technology is that it was developed through the eyes of a businessman. Keep it simple, under the KISS method. Keep it simple. And if I could apply the law of economics, then in fact I could bring it in by the approach of decentralization, both in mass production as well as installation.
So that not everyone knew what they were making; they were just making a little part of it.
Well, no, that was not the question. For example, if I was to build up a large manufacturing facilities and put in $5 or $15 billion over a 15, 20-year period of time, then the banking institutions, the World Banking System, controls me. But there are many people, independent business people that own their own plastic mold injection outfits. They own their own electronic areas. So the question is, as a businessman, why should I try to invest in equipment and hardware and buildings and so forth that is already there? Give the opportunity to those people who have existing business or want to go into independent businesses, okay, and say, hey, here's a product. This is what we want you to make. You go ahead and do it. But you centralize both the production of the devices as well as the decentralized installation, because we're facing a very high critical situation today. As an example, if you look at my logo, it says Job 38 verse 22 and 23. And Job 38 verse 22 and 23. All right, now I started development of the water fuel cell technology back during the time when the Arabs threw the embargo on the United States. And at that time, we were caught by surprise. And as an example, we had only 2.5 days of aviation fuel to fight a war. In all probability, at that time, if Russia would have known it, it probably would have attacked the United States. Our entire sophisticated naval task force sat out in the ocean for several weeks before the first supply ship came alongside. I was affiliated in retail and the truck parks, making over $1 million a year profit, actually $20 million throughout the United States. And when our trucks stopped along the side of the roads and goods and services were no longer moving, then I started asking such questions as, hey, how long do we have before the food supply chain in the United States is disrupted? And many businesses like Cardinal Food Industry in Columbus, Ohio said, hey, Stan, we have less than 27 days. If you don't get those trucks moving, then the masses of people in Columbus, Ohio will be facing starvation. Because the entire industrial base of the U.S. as well as international is based on the supply and utilization of energy. And it alarmed me that a little country over the Mideast could actually cripple the United States, not only cripple the United States, but actually cripple the war of the entire world based on the supply of energy to maintain those industrial bases. So at that time, I went in my office laboratory and said, God, I love my country. It's the greatest country. If you'll help me put a power supply in the country, I'll do anything that you want me to do. So I have been actually bringing in the technology under the power and authority of the Word of God. And of course, many people ask me why I'm still alive today. Well, I've learned the power of angels. In the Bible, one guardian angel destroyed 185,000 Assyrian troops. And in the Bible, one guardian angel destroyed all the firstborn of Egypt, and I have two of them with me at all times. One happens to be a foot bigger than I am. He's got a chest on him like that, and I said, thank you, Lord, I need him. So when I started, my background is quite diversified, from research development, product development, engineering, corporate entrepreneuring, starting corporations from ground floor right on up into multi-international areas. And so I really have found out the Lord has prepared me well over 20 years or more to do what I'm doing today. So back in 1975, as an independent businessman, I was relatively not attached to any major research development facility. So I started to develop the technology in my own laboratories. And as a result, it was pretty hard to extrapolate what I was doing. One of the strategies was, of course, I had filed a series of patents. I did not file a total master patent. You know, there's many loopholes in both in the U.S. patent processing and international areas. As an example, if you would release some of this technology into the public domain, England will statutorily block you from receiving your patents all on Europe.
Yeah, well, that's what we've heard too, is that if you're trying to put any patents in or anything, it's the quickest road to the CIA or whoever is trying to stop this kind of work. So that's why I'm amazed that you've actually...
Well, what happened in the United States was that in the late 70s, Congress had passed the law that the U.S. government must now recognize the inventor, because it's in our Constitution that we have the rights for to invent the technology. So I doubt very seriously if this technology would have been able to be developed in any other country of the world because of the Constitution. And yes, I had fought many, many battles. The Arabs had tried to squelch and suppress the technology, so as the Russians, and even Japanese elements had come into the technology. But the strategy was, as the Lord had shown me through the Holy Spirit, was that as I started developing the technology, I started filing the patents. I filed multiple series of patents. And each patent by themselves, where it was patentable and did solve a given problem in utilizing hydrogen as a fuel source. But they'd only woke up to the second last patent as to really what I had. And at that time, it was too late. Yes, I had fought many battles, and of course I'm writing a book about all of it. And the title of the book is With the Lord There's Purpose, and it will give my testimony of all the battles and so forth we have fought. But when I was pulled into the Pentagon, when the U.S. government recognized what I had, and I was escorted into the Pentagon because wars had been won or lost by the supply of fuel. And of course, Patton proved that in World War II. And we, in our national military budget, about 50% of that's for logistics support of energy. Well, also during the Arab embargo, as an example, when we had no diesel fuel to operate our diesel-fired submarines, the nuclear task force had to go on alert 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In a very short period of time, over 60% of our nuclear task force had become inoperable. And as a result of that, the U.S. for the first time had no abilities even for global defense. Shortly now, from 1975, during the Arab embargo, we were dependent on about 40% of foreign oil. And this is where the President of the United States said that we must come up with an alternate energy source if we are to survive. We have not reversed our dependency on foreign oil. It's now escalated to well over 60%. Where I forced DOE, Department of Energy, to admit to the American people that, in fact, we are still dependent of around 60% on foreign oil. Now, if anything happens or takes place where that oil is stopped to the countries, then the entire economic base of this country or any other world would collapse. I have been preaching, in fact, that the same thing that occurred in the U.S. fields that occurred from 1965 to 75, where our oil pressure started dropping in the oil fields, we went on the dependency of foreign oil. Now, the exact same thing that has occurred in the United States is also has been occurring in the Arab fields. You just can't keep pulling the oil out of the ground and expect that it's going to be there forever. And I have 5 governmental agencies, U.S. governmental agencies, that verified now that, in fact, that their oil fields are starting to depressurize. But they are depressurizing 3 times faster than occurred in the United States. So the experts know that the fact that we have less than 15 years of supply of oil coming out of the Mideast. Now, after 15 years, if there's not a new and an alternate energy source that comes into the world economy, then the entire world economy will be destroyed very quickly.
And are you saying the governments are admitting this and saying go ahead?
Yes. In other words, the issuance of our patents was on the premise that we would bring the technology out and get it into the marketplace. Another situation has come up, of course. I have been trying to develop the technology to possibly head off the Mideast crisis. What they really don't understand, what they're not really realizing at the present time in the Mideast, if Saddam decides to use CBR weaponry, that's chemical, biological, radiation weaponry, from what I understand, Germany had sold them the germ warfare. If he uses this type of weapon in the Mideast, then it's possible that the germ warfare that they have is that the contamination, the germs can breed on the bacteria in the air or bacteria in water or even in bacteria of oil. It takes a very small amount of deposit of the germ warfare in order to allow it to expand and grow. So if he uses this in the Mideast at this critical time, then what's going to happen is that it's possible that all the oil reserves in the Mideast will become contaminated. If that's the case, then every country of the world or respective country of the world will have to stop shipment of oil to their countries to prevent the contamination to occur within their own country and possibly affect the lives of the people within each country. So you're looking at that it's possible that within a short period of time, the entire flow of oil coming out of the Mideast will totally be stopped, and that will shut down the entire industrial base in the entire world.
Are you saying like you know the Rockefellers and whatever have so far, like we were saying before, come in and said stop the development of this technology? Are you saying that they won't do that anymore?
No. There are several major swings that has now started to alert the public that we must do something. One is truth is a very powerful thing. Now they're recognizing, in fact, that the oil reserves are not there for the world, and that they are depleting very, very quickly, and that we must somehow swing to an alternate energy source to allow the economic base to survive. Secondly, we're realizing that we cannot keep continually polluting the air. We can't keep putting hydrocarbons in the air. We can't keep extracting oxygen out of the air. We must be able to reverse the greenhouse effect. And if we do not do this, then it's very reasonable to say that within a short period of time we'll start to suffocate. In the period of time since the introduction of the automobile, as an example, the content in the air, I believe, was around 38% or 28%. And that has really, from that point on until now, it has dropped as much as 7%. Now, right now there's 5.2 billion people on the face of this earth, and within a mere 15-year period of time, it'll double to 9 billion. We already know by satellite that the rainforests are dying, that over 50% are dying, that's irreversible, they are dead. That's supplied about 80% of the oxygen in our air. So we can't, yes.
I think he also asked about Rockefeller. They have tried every way to stop him too. Yeah. He
Yes.
asked about Rockefeller.
Yes, in my, it became very evident that this type of technology cannot be developed through the federal governments nor the multi-international corporations because of their control mechanism. It had to be developed by an individual working out of this garage without that type of control mechanism. So it was a way that when I started, the Lord had started to have me develop the technology and develop in such a way that I was able to get all the patents issued both nationally and not only win it for the United States, but also win it for the world. Because once they realized what I had, and as I said, they had pulled me into the Pentagon, there was two major reasons that I had used to get us off of national security and allow it to come in. Number one, if you don't have an economy, you will not have a government, and if you don't have a government, you're not going to have a military. It's just as imperative that this technology get into the marketplace as well as these other areas. Second one is, what happens, gentlemen, if a foreign power can come in your land and use your own existing laws to block this type of technology from coming in? That's when President Reagan took the executive action to assure and guarantee the issuance and the processing of these patents. So it's a struggle. We're all in the same boat, so to speak, and therefore we have to be able to solve the problem. We know that the federal government and the multi-internationals cannot control it. If I had signed this technology over to General Electric or Westinghouse or any other multi-international corporation, they would be taken over within a period of 24 hours. If you have enough money, you can take over anything you so desire. Now, 60%, we're paying out well over $200 billion to the Arabs for that petrol fuel. They spent $200 billion from trying to keep this thing off the marketplace. That's why communication is one of the most greatest things that we have today. That's why I'm here and communicating as to what we're doing.
I heard that the stealth bomber was made flies using the same sort of technology.
Yes, and also we developed a hydrogen-powered aircraft that was originally to go Mach 25 in outer space, and with this technology, take it right on up to 150 Mach. The United States is not sitting on this technology, but no stretch of the imagination. Right now, as we are down to a day and a quarter of aviation fuel to fight a war, and once we bridge and reduce the fuel supplies, go down to a day, then the Joint Chiefs of Staff will have to make the decision, no more global defense. And as we all know, that when countries go from a dictatorship to free democracy, the war brokers are in there, and the pendulum can swing into civil war or disrupt it into tremendous war. And of course, they make their monies by war. That's what they do. They promote wars. And the war brokers started World War I, they'd start World War II, and they'd start World War III in the name of making money. Whether we live or survive, they'd be happy making the money. So the situation is very real now. It's primarily over the Mideast that could topple and cripple the entire industrial base of the entire world. So this was the basis of the reasons for developing the water fuel cell technology. And as I had developed it, there were several major design criteria that I had to comply with. The first one was that I had to build the system in a garage. And the reason for that is because if I could build it in a garage, I would bypass exotic manufacturing technology that can tow it. For example, if a guy had developed a chemical that could make the solar cell more efficient, but if Exxon controlled the vapor, which is in turn controlled by the Arabs, it can't get out in the marketplace. So the technology had to be built by the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't make it complicated. And secondly, it had to be built out of very readily available materials. because we don't have time to develop exotic materials or like used platinums and so forth that we have not access on them, like Russia controls the bulk of platinum in the world. Another criteria was that it had to be built through the laws of economics, that the guy who comes up with the simple way is going to win out. Now there's a lot of Cadillac ideas that come into existence, but because it violates the law of economics, it never gets out to the marketplace. So we had to develop through the eyes of a businessman, and the guy who comes up with the cheapest way is going to win out. Now, my files back home in my laboratory, I have the most compiled study on hydrogen that's ever come out of the scientific world through NASA. As you probably know, the Columbia spaceship program is propelled by liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. And in that report, it clearly stipulated that hydrogen was the most ideal fuel of the future that could be utilized anywhere in the world. But they had not the answer in the following areas. Number one, to produce the hydrogen gas economically. Second area was to be able to control the hydrogen on demand. Third area was to be able to adjust the burn rate of the hydrogen gas to co-equal the fossil fuels. And I added a fourth one, the ability to transport it without spark ignition. And I hold all the patent rights both nationally and internationally on this technology. Now, since the technology was built under the power authority word of God in a garage, it now gave me the abilities to be able to release it under the law of economics. So when, as a product development engineer, whenever anyone would show me a new idea, a new concept, a new way of doing something, if it would not comply with the law of economics, you gentlemen would not hurt my feelings. You can get out and walk out of the meeting anytime you want. I would do the same thing. If the technology was complying to the law of economics, and then when you look at this tech base, if you answer the question that yes it does, then you'd have to agree that we have a new alternate energy source that we can move into the economies of the world and do it very, very, very quickly. So we started to proceed on developing, and as the Lord had shown me the knowledge pertaining to water. Right now we're facing a tremendous problem beyond the Mideast situation. I was in Washington, D.C. in 1965 when the government called the scientists together to come up with a fail-safe nuclear power system. In 3 days, and listening to their testimony, I got up in the meeting, and this is before I had come to Lord, and said, gentlemen, everything you said is a bunch of BS. There's no substance on the face of this earth that you subjected to the hostile environment of nuclear radiation, you're going to have the hourglass effect. And then, of course, Three Mile Island proved that prophecy out many years later. And, of course, Chernobyl, we all know about Chernobyl. Now, they talk about the radiation going up in the atmosphere, but they don't talk about the meltdown going down into the water table. And the water table now is dumping the contaminated or radioactive water into the Mediterranean, which is now, in a very short period of years, the Mediterranean will increase in radiation, will spill over into the Mediterranean. So all those millions of people in Europe now that will use the water to wash their clothes or to drink or to process that water will probably die of cancer due to the high exposure to radiation. So now, during, for example, England almost had a near nuclear accident. Some brilliant engineer decided the way to reconstitute the carbon rods, send a bunch of amps into the carbon rods, and all it does is create a hot spot and splits the rod, which in turn you now have no control. Helsinki just shut down another nuclear power plant with problems with the circulation on their stainless steel piping. So we're really facing a very critical situation all the way around. Now, in getting in this type of technology or equivalent technology is going to take the masses or the people to come together in one accord. It's no longer going to say, well, I'm going to leave it up to someone else to do it. If we don't do it, it's not going to get in. So in starting developing the technology, the first area was to address how to release the hydrogen from natural water and do it economically and satisfy the first major requirement of NASA. And of course, what the first thing we did in the scientific area is that you always got to learn to ask the right question. In the prior art, example one, we demonstrated this technology under 101, U.S.C. Section 101. The U.S. Patent Office says that whenever you present something, you must show inoperability, otherwise you do not get the issuance of the patent. When we had showed them the technology pertaining to water, the first thing that when they recognized this, is why has no one else thought about this technology before? Well, there were several reasons I gave them. Number one, if you had looked at Scripture, Job 38, verse 22 and 23, the Lord said that the knowledge would come at a time of great trouble. And if this is not a time of great trouble, I don't know what is. The second one is that the reason why Faraday did not discover the electrical polarization process is because he needed several modern-day inventions and he needed some prior knowledge. One of the things he needed was stainless steel, the invention of stainless steel 304 material, which is chemically entered to the process. If you expose it to hydrogen and oxygen gases in a water bath exposed to voltage, it does not have a chemical interaction.
That's why you said platinum before, because platinum's inert to the same process.
Well, platinum is extremely ultra expensive,
Yeah.
and it will break down under the conditions of exposure to hydrogen and oxygen, some of it. Okay, so stainless steel became a very economical material to use. Matter of fact, on our actual lab certification testing, the longevity of the stainless steel material is 0.0001 per year. So the fuel cell is just as good as the time you fired up to 20 years, going up to 10,000 years. And if any of you guys live over 10,000 years, you come back and tell me, I want to tell you, learn your secret. So the stainless steel material gave us the abilities that we now have a component we do not need to replace. We set up a non-chemical environment in order to release the hydrogen from the water. Okay, so we now have, we don't have to replace the parts. If you ever look at the prior arts in electrolysis processes, you will see that their electrodes are tremendous mass and size. If a brilliant engineer could get a car to run down the road on electrolysis, he may get it to last for maybe a minute to 5 minutes or so, but all of that mass size of electrodes will decompose. So inherently, the electrolysis process did not comply to the law of economics because it was a self-destructive unit and we had to add chemicals to it. Now, if you had an electrolysis process and had to add chemicals to it, and let's say you did get a car to run down the road, then you would have to spend billions of dollars to try to come up with chemical refinery plants to be able to try to even support this gas supply levels in the United States. And that would cost billions of dollars over a 20 to 30 to 40 year period of time, and EPA would not allow you to dump the chemicals onto the ground. So electrolysis process does not comply to the law of economics and does not be able to solve the problem. It's a self-destructive unit. So we had to come up with a non-chemical device, come up with a way that we could release the hydrogen from water, and if we can do this, water has a phenomenal amount of energy source in the form of hydrogen, and if you burn it, its energy release is 2.5 times more powerful than that of gasoline. So the first answer we needed to find was how do we economically split the water molecule? Now the key was how do we switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule, and so we'd address what takes place. Well, when the two hydrogen atoms...
Stanford, could I take 1 sec?
Yes.
Could you sometimes, when using a technical term, just describe it more fundamentally for those who haven't got the technical basis, like covalent bonds?
Yeah, I'll get to that. First was to address how do we switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule and do it economically. And when you consider the formation of the water molecule, then when the two hydrogen atoms link to the oxygen atom to form the water molecule, under the law of physics something's got to happen, right? Now what actually happens is that this outer orbit of the oxygen atom normally has only 6 electrons in it. But this particular orbit will allow us up to 8 electrons to be occupied at one particular time. And as a result of this, this now allows the two hydrogen atoms to link up with the oxygen atom to form the water molecule to go into stable state. Now, on the law of physics, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, something's got to happen. Now, what actually happens is that when the two hydrogen atoms link up to the oxygen atom, and the oxygen atom accepts the hydrogen electron to set up the covalent bonding, then something's got to happen. And what happens is that under normal state, there's 8 electrons in the oxygen atom, and then there's 8 protons. But when the oxygen atom accepts the 2 hydrogen electrons, then there's an imbalance that occurs. And what now takes place is we have now 10 electrons, but we still have only 8 protons. And as a result of this, the oxygen atom takes on a negative electric charge. Now, since the hydrogen atom is now sharing its electron to set up the covalent bonding, then the positive charge proton swings the hydrogen atom to the positive charge. Therefore, the atoms of the water molecule takes on an electrical charge. Now, that was the second major thing that Faraday would have to know, is in fact that the bonding, the 2 unlike atoms of the water molecule is actually being held together by an electrical attraction force. And that electrical attraction force is equivalent to the two shared electrons.
So in other words, once it's all combined together, the total charge is 0.
Right. That the water molecule is stabilized to net the electrical charge 0, but its atoms are opposite electrically charged. Now, another way to verify this, you can send a microwave. The question is, what happens when you send a microwave energy through water, and why does it heat up the water and cause the water molecules to agitate? Well, what happens is the microwave is swinging the atoms of the water molecules because they have a electrical charge applied to them, and that's why microwave energy will heat up the water and superheat it very, very quickly. All right, so the key is now that what's holding these atoms together is this electrical bonding force Q and Q prime. And it is only equivalent to the two shared electrons because on the law of physics says for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So we know now that it was very obvious then to say, hey, if that's the case, and these atoms do not take on an electrical attraction, then in fact it was obvious that if I've exposed the water molecule to a high external high voltage field, then we could pull apart the water molecule and do it economically. And the question is, does these unlike atoms take on an electrical attraction field? And they do not. And the reason why they do not do this is because the oxygen atom, those electrons are paired together and swing in opposite direction as they pair together. They cancel out their electromagnetic field, and as a result, there is no electrical attraction force between the two unlike atoms. So all we now have to do is to overcome the electrical attraction force of these two atoms based on Faraday's, based on Coulomb's and Newton's second law of electrical force with an electronic circuit. So what we had done now is set up and put an electric voltage field here, and electric voltage field here. We do it this way. So now we set up an electrical field and expose the water molecule to a high electric voltage field and restrict the amps. Then, if this now is set up as a B plus voltage zone and this sets up as a B minus voltage zone, then under the law of opposite charges we'll do what? Like charges will repel, and unlike will attract. So therefore, if I put a B plus voltage field here, would not now the negative charge oxygen atom be attracted to that voltage field? Now, likewise, at the same time, would not, if I put a B minus voltage field here, would not the positive charge hydrogen and oxygen now be attracted to the negative voltage field? And as a result, now we're using voltage as a potential energy source and pulling apart. The water molecule starts to elongate. As you start to elongate the water molecule, you're now changing the time share rate of the electron, and as a result of that, you pull apart the water molecule. Now there's another phenomena that is happening also, is that in the characteristic of water, it is a dielectric liquid. Okay? Now in the electrolysis process, it was required that the two best patents ever issued in the electrolysis process was Ian North and Horvath's patents, which clearly stipulated that in an electrolysis process, that if you put it into an electrolysis cell, that first of all you had to use distilled water, which is a dielectric liquid. And because of that, you had to add the chemicals to it. And so with their systems approach, they had to put in 80% was distilled water, which has cost just as much money to process natural water into distilled water than it does to run your car down the road. And then you'd have to put in between 20% per volume of chemical additives like sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide in order to get hydrogen gas production. And because the electropolarization process of using voltage now to separate the water molecule, we now can use ordinary natural water and have it non-processed. But there's another feature to it, is that natural water is a dielectric liquid. And when you expose the water molecules to the high voltage zone, then what happens is that because of the dielectric properties of water, then the dielectric properties of water will now become electrically intensified. And so as it takes on an electrical charge, then the hydrogen charges will increase in their positive charge areas, and also the oxygen atom increases in its negative electrical charge. And so what happens now, that since you're increasing these electrically charges being exposed to the applied voltage field, then the covalent electron switches off in the following way, that as this increases positive electrical charge, would not this negative charge covalent electron be attracted back towards the hydrogen atom? And since the negative charge oxygen atom is increasing in its negative electrically charged, would you not now have a repelling force being applied to the covalent bonding? And so as a result, when you tune in now on voltage, now you have the ability to automatically switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule. Now that now became a physical force in separating the water molecule, and voltage now becomes potential energy. Now in the field of physics, we know that voltage does in fact perform work. We've known this for quite some time. But heretofore, never anyone ever dreamed of using potential energy in the form of voltage to perform work in order to pull apart the water molecule. And Faraday would also have had the knowledge that in fact he had to have an electronic circuit, which we call the voltage intensifier circuit, that gave us the ability to switch off the amp flow and allow the voltage to take over in a dead short condition. Now, in all probability, if he had had this knowledge, then we'd have been on hydrogen many years ago. Now, the point out about potential energy on voltage, to give you an example of this, is if you go home and you turn on your TV set or your computer monitor, you're adjusting the B plus voltage potential behind the screen, and as a result, you're now accelerating the negative charge electrons coming off the gun, and that increased velocity of the negative charge electrons striking the fluorescent material now produces a greater light intensity. We know also, like in a cyclotron, that if you use opposite electrical fields, you now can accelerate particles in a 2 or 3 mile area tunnel, and as a result of this, you can accelerate these particles close to the speed of light, and those particles hit a photographic plate, and that's how physicists study matter. So we knew, in fact, that voltage does, in fact, perform work. But heretofore, no one ever dreamed of applying it to switch off the covalent bonding of the water molecule and do it in this way and do it economically.
We've always thought in the past that current would do it.
Right, always current, and they would always, because, Faraday, he needed modern-day electronic circuit designs capable of restricting amps and allow voltage to go over. He worked with a very crude battery, and he worked with just an electrical wires going into the beaker with chemicals. So he created a dead short condition, and when you create the dead short condition, you cannot bring voltage up. Voltage remains low, and amps take over and does the work. All right, so this is why Faraday did not discover the electric polarization process. Now, in order to come up with the economic way of doing this, then the Lord had me to develop what was called the VIC, or the voltage. It's called the voltage intensifier circuit. Which gave us abilities now to restrict the amps and allow voltage to take over. Now, as you know, or who's electronic people in here? Praise the Lord. Okay, whenever electronic people can understand this far easier than a physicist. A physicist deals with strictly the nucleus of the atom, and electronics deals with the movement and deflection of electrons, and that's exactly what we're talking about: moving and deflecting the electron. And in the electronic circuit, it's clearly proven by Coulomb's and Newton's second law, you can use electrical force to move electrically charged particles in an electronic circuit. Is that not the basic basis of electronics?
Yes.
Okay, so we're not defining the laws of physics in order to accomplish the task. Now, whenever you put a dielectric liquid between two electrical conductive plates, what do you got? You got a capacitor, right? So we know that when you take a coil and hook it in series to a capacitor, you now develop what's called a resonant charging choke. So now I've set up two charging chokes on the opposite side of the capacitor. And I'm now allowing the water and the properties of water now to become the property or the component part of the electronic circuit. So we now know that on a resonant charging choke, that when I put in a switching diode in here, then as I would pulse the circuit, then these coils would become energized, and they would create an electromagnetic field which acts as an electronic choke, right? The electrons coming off of here has an electromagnetic field, and as a result, when these coils develop their magnetic field, it now chokes off and prevents electron flow from occurring. So since the diode now is acting as a switching diode, once you terminate the pulse, it opens up the pulsing circuit and now allows these magnetic fields to collapse. And when they collapse, now we're producing a unipolar voltage field across the capacitor, but in the process we are restricting amps. Now note, we are using the electromagnetic field to restrict the amps, not a resistive element. If you have a resistive element, you're consuming power.
I know one thing that was noticed in your circuit diagram is that you were using a resistive choke.
Or was that a mistake?
Or was that in your actual...
No, in filing the patents, I filed them in several ways. They say, well, I use it this way. You have a hard time to get around me, because not only have I filed the patents on the particular technology, but I filed patents in all of its related area to give me a technological buffer zone to be able to ensure that I can bring the technology in.
So in other words, that resistive choke that you've got in your...
It's not necessary.
It's not necessary? And it says, where the hell is it? Here, you say here, resonant charging circuit, resistive coil wire, R2.
Yeah, you can put a resistive wire with the coil. So some intelligent guy is going to say, well, I got a copper coil, and one says, well, I'm going to use a resistive wire. Well, sorry, folks, I got it both ways.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Just to get around the patent. It's just people might use that to get around the patent.
Yeah, I mean, a guy invents something, they say, well, all I'll do is I'll change something on the patent and try to get around it. Okay. Well, this is developed under the KISS method. Keep it simple, stupid. So the simpler it is, the harder it is to get around the patent. And of course, when this knowledge was coming forth, it was fantastic for us, because I knew that if we kept it simple like this, then it would be very, very hard to go. And if you look at all of our patents, you apply a voltage across that water molecule, you violated my patent rights. Okay, now what we're doing is that this circuit is not only now restricting the amps, but we're now pulsing and adjusting this pulse frequency to tap into the resonance properties of water by the dielectric value of water. And as a result, that when you tune into this, then what happens, amp draw drops down to the lowest value, and voltage now takes off towards infinity if the electronic components will allow it to occur.
What sort of frequency are we talking about?
Well, we have various frequencies when you can adjust to hit resonance. The key was to go for natural water, non-processed water. And so it was very obvious that we've developed the electronic circuitry to interface with this, that we now electronically zero in to the resonant frequency of any form of natural water, because it would change based on the contaminants within the water.
You just let it peak itself.
Right. It automatically scans it right in, locks right in the resonance, and holds it there.
What
can't
order of
change much.
frequency?
Pardon?
What order of frequency are we talking about? A few hertz or...
No, we go from 0 up to 10 kilohertz. Even with this type of circuit you see here, if I hit this at 10 kilohertz, would this not increase it to 20 kilohertz? So not only is this as a pulsing circuit to restrict amp flow, it's also is a frequency multiplier. And guess what else? If I was going to increase more hydrogen gas yield, what would I do?
Increase the voltage.
Huh?
Increase the voltage in it.
Yes. Now, how would I do that? Would I need to change the pulsing circuit here?
Oh, just change the amplitude of it.
All I have to do here is just increase the number of turns of this coil, would I not?
But if you want to do it electronically so that you can control it, you could do it just by having a circuit controlling input voltage. And that
Oh yes,
controlling
in the
gas
car. In the
Yes.
car, for example, we're varying it like from 0 to 12 volts.
That's right, yeah, with an
But-
accelerator.
But these can be varied from 0 to 2,000 volts, 2 kilovolts, right, or higher. But what I'm pointing out is the electronic circuitry can remain the same. If I want to increase the electrical power still further, the inductance capacitance of this resonant charging choke simply just needs to be increased.
So would you step in some more inductance, or would you just design a bigger one if you wanted to?
Yeah, I just simply design a bigger one and wrap more coils to it. So instead of hitting it at 2K, I'm hitting it at 5K, or hitting it
How many
at
millihenries
90,000
are the
volts.
chokes?
Huh?
How many millihenries are the chokes, approximately?
Well, I mean, you can come. It depends. Again, it depends. It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. You're going to have to adjust the power input of the circuit, and the only problem with to adjust the circuit to get your proper voltage. So you're going to consume electrical power in the circuit. But the point being is, under the power equation, whenever you restrict the amps, the only thing you got left over is voltage, right? Which is potential energy. So you're not consuming it. So I'm going to consume a little bit of energy, 2 amps or 3 amps or 5 amps. Big deal. Because when you release the energy from the water, in the form of the hydrogen gas, its energy yield is 2.5 times that of gasoline. Now note the rule of thumb, it's not 2.5 times that of fingernail polish. It's not 2.5 times that of butter. It's actually 2.5 times that of gasoline. Okay, now, okay. All right, so now the VIC unit was experiment in developing to restrict the amp flow and allow voltage to take over to release the hydrogen and oxygen gas from water.
What sort of frequency is this that you really operate in, and when you're using, say, just an ordinary tap water or something? What sort of frequency does it normally work?
Well, it'll vary from 0 up to 10 kilohertz is what we've been working in the range. If you go up into the megahertz range, then you're getting the more exotic type of electronic components, which is not necessary. You can peak it a little bit further, but it isn't going to do any good. The action is really hitting it with the voltage when you're tuning into the resonance. And when you hit in the resonance under this condition, then the water molecule just falls apart. Okay, so
That's what I'm asking. What is the resonance frequency of water?
Yeah, and based on different, natural like well water, rainwater, city water, ocean water, okay, they have different contaminants, anywhere from 2 parts per million to 20 parts per million, up to 40 parts per million. Okay, so resonance can occur anywhere in our area. And the other factor that affects resonance is the rate by which the gases is going through the resonant cavity, and so that can change. So you can hit resonance at a low voltage level, and as you're raising the voltage level, let's say from 100 volts to 2,000 volts, it's possible that the flow rate of water will start changing resonance. So we've developed the electronic circuits to zero in on that. So it's a very broad range. The beautiful thing I like about it is it's in the audio range, so it's just like using audio transformers. You can accomplish the task. Now, if you want to go up and zero it up or fine for a particular application, that's fine. But the key was to keep using natural water. If I use natural water or rainwater, is it costing me anything? So the 3 components I'm using in the operation of the fuel cell is stainless steel 304 material, which you don't need to replace. So am I complying with all law of economics? The second one is I'm using natural water. Does it cost me anything for natural water? We had a lot of rain around here the other day, you know.
How would that apply on seawater stands?
Same thing. Because you're restricting the amps and allow voltage to take over, the chemical end of the reaction is held at a very minimum. So when you release it, then any contaminants in the water, it remains in the water. Now that's the adverse effect of the fuel cell, is that you've got to get rid of the contaminants. Well, one of the things is that you can operate the fuel cell to meet your energy needs, shut it down, hook a little computer to it, dump out the contaminated water, rinse it out like a dishwater, go ahead and fill it up with water again, re-energize it up to around 4 to 6 ounces of back pressure, and continue on operation. But in the cycling, if you notice in my drawing, when you burn hydrogen and oxygen, what's the byproduct? Water, right? Well, instead of letting the water go back up in the atmosphere,
It's pure. It's absolutely pure. You can
Right.
use it for drinking or whatever you want.
right? So can I not recapture the gases coming off and cool it down, and as a result, feed it back into the fuel cell and recycle it again? So when I do that, then rinsing the fuel cell it out has become automatic, and therefore you don't have any servicing in the areas of cleaning up the resin cavity. Matter of fact, the release of the gas inside the resin cavity acts as a scrubbing action, so it never clogs up, no matter how much contaminants. Or if you have like 40 parts or 50 parts per million, it won't clog up the system at all.
Or stand another use for the whole system is just purifying water.
Yes,
You can just use it to purify water and get heat as well.
yes. And not only that, it also gives us the ability to move into other areas of the technology.
Can I just interrupt here?
Yes.
What happens to the heavy water content?
The heavy water content.
Well,
In what
all
way?
water has a heavy water level. All drinking water, all rainwater has heavy water and other traces. I mean, water contains basically 33 different elements.
Okay, those elements or contaminants in the water remains in the fuel cell. So not only is the water fuel cell a phenomenal water purification device, it's also an extractor. So if you have elements like iron or nickel or whatever you have in there, it also can be extracted out of the water.
I'm talking about just pure water, and its purest sense, it still has 33 different components.
Well, if those contaminants are there, it would still remain within the fuel cell, unless you would take it out. Because
But hang on, I'm talking about the combinations between the hydrogen isotopes and the oxygen isotopes. What happens to these? You polarize them and break them down? You must do. So that must be a gas component.
oh yeah, as a matter of fact, when we took the analysis of the gas, okay, all the gases coming out for the U.S. patent and the foreign patent office, it was coming exactly 2-to-1, which was absolutely beautiful because it solved all of our problems because voltage was switching off and pulling them apart. Now, if you're going to start talking about heavy waters and getting into the isotope areas, then when you look at the fundamental voltage again, it has a phenomenal event not only to prevent the action from occurring, but it'll just simply pull it apart.
Well,
Now,
here in Auckland, what I did is I actually ran a Ford 6-cylinder motor on
Yeah.
the water in the lab. What we did is we condensed the water and we took part of that and reintroduced it into the inlet manifold,
Yeah.
and a strange phenomena took place. And that is it started to continue on with less energy input. And I felt that it was the isotopic reaction from the condensed water that's going through a secondary combustion phase. Have you got any comment on that?
yeah, I'll comment about that a little later. You see he's worked on hydrogen. Yeah. Next factor we did is also the Lord was dealing with me is developing what's called the electron extraction circuit. And this electron extraction circuit was very unique in several areas. We already found out now we can release the hydrogen from water. And its burn yield was 2.5 times that of gasoline. That's National Bureau of Figure standards. That's the NASA's figures, and that's our figures to show a tremendous amount of release of energy. Now, we were going for that we needed to protect the military integrity of the United States and of the Western world. As I was making preliminary presentations to General Bouchard and their technical staff at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, I said, General, I don't care how sophisticated hydrogen or powered aircraft you have sitting on the runway, without any diesel, without any aviation fuel, it becomes a piece of junk. Now, generals don't like to be told that their equipment is a piece of junk, but it becomes so when you have no form of energy. So it was imperative that we now start to go in areas of developing systems that we could literally maintain the military posture of the United States and the Western world. And of course, I've been in very high-level meetings in England and other countries demonstrating or presenting the technology. Now, as we started to, we found a way of releasing the energy from water very economically. It solved the KISS method and the law of economics. Now we started to go into resonance, as we started to point out in resonance, hitting the fuel cell in a way that we're now allowing the hydrogen gas to be developed even at a higher rate of production. And we've taken it now and raised the voltage up to the point that we're starting to ionize the water, the atoms of the water molecules. Now, ionization is where voltage is much like that of your neon tube. When you apply voltage across it, it plucks off the electrons. And so we're plucking off the electrons now of the atoms of the water molecules, and then those atoms have missing electrons will take on a positive electrical charge. And now you've got some negative charge electrons bouncing around in there. And we're now starting to superimpose a physical impact onto the electrical polarization process, which now gives us a phenomenal high gas yield over the prior state of the art. Now, since we're going into the ionization process and we are now plucking off the electrons of the atoms of the water molecule, and these electrons are now being injected out of the water molecule atoms, now we're liberating these electrons. We're liberating them. And as a result of this, we're now starting to pull the electrons out of the water. And as we pull them out of water, if I now put a P plus on this side, and I have a light bulb here, and I start plucking the electrons, and they're moving along the wire here, down here, and as they go into the filament, they interact with the filament, consuming the electron, and in the process of consuming it, produce heat energy in the form of light energy. Is that violating laws of physics? Therefore, I am now producing electrical energy as a byproduct of the process. Isn't that phenomenal? Gee whiz.
So you got some stray electrons coming off of the system that you can utilize for heat production.
Right, so I'm pulling off electrons. I want to destabilize now. Okay, now I got an economical way because all I have to do is up the voltage. If I increase voltage, I increase hydrogen gas yield, right? So I've now solved the second problem in NASA, being able to produce the gas in demand. But I need even higher energy yields, in order to be able to get it into aviation industry, to get it in to protect the military integrity of the countries. So the key was that I wanted to also produce electrical energy. So by pulling off the electrons out of the water, and as I pull the electrons out of the water, I am now producing electrical energy, am I not? Electricity? Now, under Coulomb's law says in electronic circuit, if you had 1 volt deflection in electronic circuit, what will happen? You roughly come up with 6.25 times 10 to the 18th power of electrons, which is equivalent to 1 amp.
I'm glad you said so.
Right? Yeah. So theoretically then, if I use water as the source of the electrons, right? If I would apply 100 volts across that light bulb, theoretically speaking, how much amps would I be able to pull out of the system?
100 tons.
Well, it'd be 100 amps, right? So at 100 amps, 100 volts times 100 amps gives me what? 10 kilowatts of electrical energy. Isn't that amazing?
So you just need to produce your gas. You don't even need an alternator to get your electrical energy.
Right. I don't need any mechanical rotating device whatsoever.
What happens to the gas that has the electrons pulled off when they're recombined? What happens to them? How do the electrons get back on the gas?
Well,
Back from the water.
Okay. You can come up here, and the gases can come up here to a ground sink that can take electrons back in from the ground, right? And the law of physics is if I got an oxygen atom here that's got 3 missing electrons, all right. So therefore, I can
suck it out from somewhere.
Yeah, I can suck it off from the ground of Earth to bring it back to stabilize. But I really don't want to stabilize it.
You want a
Okay,
perpetual
but
movement.
yes. So now this is not a perpetual motion device. When I was called in the Pentagon and presented to General Abramson and their staff and NASA, General Abramson realized what I had and said, "Man, it's a perpetual motion device." And I said, "No, General." I said, "It's not. It's a perpetual motion is defined as a device that will last for eternity, and there's nothing that man's ever made that will last for eternity. It does not define power input versus power output. The reason why it's not perpetual motion is I'm using water now as the energy source. Just like you look at gasoline as an energy source, now you're looking at water as an energy source. So as a result of this, you now can look at natural water both as a gas source and also as an electrical source. You see what I mean? Okay, and the hydrogen. Now, if I'm producing electrical energy, could I not take this back through the voltage intensifier circuit, the DIC circuit, take it back here, restrict the amps level voltage, take over, and produce more gas? So I now have a self-sustained oscillation system that just as when you fire it up and you're firing the system, it goes until what condition? Until there's no more water in the cell. Okay. Now the Earth is covered by three-quarters of the Earth is covered by water, so I'm not going to be worrying about running out of fuel source.
But you won't anyway, because you recombine the gas back to water and you got the water back again.
Yes.
You got all of it fairly renewable.
Yes.
Do you get all of it back in this process? You get all of it back.
Yes.
So it's only when you go to the atomic condition that you don't get it back.
That's right. That's right. Okay, now,
So how would the heat loss affect that? Well, if you're going to to some degree a heat loss in the process, will that not affect your system overall?
well, now you get into conservation of energy. You can't convert energy into mass into energy. Okay, we get into the areas that where what energy is now sustaining the electron in its outer orbit in an atom, and that energy to maintain the orbit of electrons is coming through the nucleus, which is the component parts are geometrically arranged in a way that acts as an aperture that it absorbs energy from another time-dimensional zone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and so when they ask us where's the energy coming from, well, you
It's coming from infinity.
yes.
So basically what they're looking at here, what you're looking at, not only resonance, but the principle of the octave principle. In other words, you've got another octave of energy above the physical one, which can be tapped into when you're resonant with it. And that's
Yeah,
what I-
absolutely. And that's where you go in and adjust the component parts inside the nucleus that opens the aperture up to allow the energy to come in.
So you're using a fourth
Okay.
dimensional. This is fourth
Would be,
dimensional
would
stuff
be.
as well.
Yeah.
That's very
I don't
great.
know whether
No,
it's
yeah.
functional. It'd be anyway.
Remember when I said a little earlier, I said the technology is only limited to the imagination to put it to work. So when you look at it that way, we got it made. Right now, I need to power the aircraft. I need to get the aircraft carriers going. We need to be able to sustain aviation industry, and we need to be able to have energy to maintain the industrial plants. if you can't have a sufficient amount of heat or energy quickly to maintain the steel mills will not come in. So it was imperative that I would develop the technology in all areas of the economy. In other words, what good would it be to develop technology, put it as a home heating system, or put it in your car and I can't get it to the trucks? If I can't get it to industry, I was pulled in a closed-door meeting in Columbus, Ohio, when the Columbia gas system informed the industrial leaders of Ohio that their gas was being cut off. Well, I saw some of the richest, most powerful industrial leaders of the state popping pills and thought they're going to have heart attacks. Because what Columbia gas system told us was that without fuel, go home and tell your 2,000 or 3,000 employees to close the doors because you had no energy to make a product. And if you can't make a product, you can't pay your bills, right? And if you can't pay your bills, you're hurting because the bigger you are, the faster you're going to fall. So the industrial leaders were very shocked, in fact, because Ohio imports over 95% of natural gas into the state of Ohio in order to try to maintain its industrial base. So it became paramount that we must go into other areas in order to sustain the economy. And this is why the hydrogen fracturing technology came into existence. Now here we're economically releasing the hydrogen and oxygen atom from the water. We have now developed a way that we can economically produce electrical energy at the same time, which gives us the fact now to have a self-sustained oscillation unit to even develop energy for a rocket engine. Now we want to take it to that and operate that of an F-18 or F-16 and fly it off the atomic power water. It was like making a presentation at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Shortly you're going to have an aircraft, and you're going to call up the nickname of the scooper that's going to go down there and scoop up the seawater. And imagine taking 100 or 200 tactical aircraft that have an unlimited energy source. They can go on a full armament and go anywhere in the world, and no country will be able to defeat it.
And he wasn't interested, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Is it true that the Stealth can fly underwater?
Yes.
Fly underwater.
It flies with water. I don't know underwater yet. It's possible with the technology, yes, that it could go underwater.
Off Hawaii there, some witnesses saw the thing emerge out of the water.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I've developed what's called hyperdrive technology on this. It's an underwater jet engine that has no moving parts, but produces phenomenal amounts of power under pulsing and uses the seawater as the fuel. So now you got a way of propelling underwater and just come right up into the air. So yes, that technology is now available. All right, now we're getting to the point that we want to be able to produce even larger amounts of energy and do it in a safe manner. Now, when the hourglass effect occurs on the water nuclear power plants, and scientists started to go towards hydrogen fusion as an answer to the energy problem. And in the process of trying to do this, one process was trying to be developed by Livermore Laboratories, by which what they would do is take hydrogen atoms and subject the hydrogen atoms at a tremendous amount of pressure, under a tremendous amount of temperatures around 10 million degrees, and then try to squeeze together to form helium and release energy. Under Einstein's equation, energy equals mass times the square of light. Energy equals mass times the square of light. Okay.
Is that correct?
Huh?
Is that correct?
Well, that's going to be correct this far.
It's a third-dimensional concept.
Yeah. Okay, now.
I just wanted to hear his impression of it. I got my thought.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go on with it though. It's correct at this point.
He's teasing you.
Yeah, because we talked about the aperture effect of bringing in energy from the other fourth dimension, one then that supersedes this. And Einstein did not equate that. Okay. He only equated in the terms of the velocity and the intensity of the light, photon energy. Okay, now, what was I talking about? Okay, the hydrogen fracturing technology. Now, bear with me a moment. I'm going to get a little bit technical. That when you burn hydrogen and oxygen in the burning process, as the unlike atoms, the hydrogen and oxygen atoms are coming together, it's releasing energy around 2.5 times that of gasoline. It's tremendously powerful. All right, but now that energy is only released up until the time that the water molecule is formed. Is that not so? Now, once that water molecule is formed, it goes into stable state. Does it not?
Yes.
Okay, now once it's gone into stable state, no more energy is being released. Now we know that water is the safest storage medium for man that we know of, right? Can we not take water and go out and dust out a fire?
Yeah.
Okay, but you release the hydrogen in the water, it becomes a phenomenal fuel source under this type of technology. All right, now we developed the hydrogen fracturing technology, and the Lord simply asked me the question when I was addressing this problem. He says, what happens if the water molecule would not form? Well, it's obvious that the process would continue to release energy up until the time either that a new atom structure is formed or that an implosion effect would occur to release a phenomenal amount of energy. Now, Einstein pondered for many, many hours and days and years over how to trigger the release from water. He knew, in fact, and stated, in fact, you can take a 1,000-car train around the Earth many, 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 many times on 1 gallon of water if you could figure out how to release that energy. And the only problem was you didn't go to the right source. You just didn't ask the Lord to show him how to trigger the process, even though his equation showed, in fact, it could be done. All right, tremendous energy. All right, so the scientific question was, what happens if you prevent the water molecule from forming? Well, if I can prevent this from forming, then I have the abilities to tap in and use a phenomenal energy source, free and safe in many respects. It's a triggering process. Now, as I pointed out, like Livermore Laboratories had gone to hydrogen fusion areas, their process is like the alchemists going over and watching the students, and they were mixing up a chemical, and so the alchemist asked the students, what are you doing? He said, well, we're trying to come up with a chemical to dissolve anything. So the alchemist asks and says, well, when you find the solution, what are you going to keep it in? Well, Livermore Laboratory, when you find the solution, what are you going to keep it in? You're going to keep it on a gigantic electric magnetic field. It takes a tremendous amount of energy. And if that magnetic field would vex in any way, you'd have a greater problem 3 Mile Island ever dreamed of having. Well, they did also demonstrate cold fusion in the laboratories. And it was called the muon process. And the muon process was that this was the hydrogen atom. And what they did was to take the hydrogen atom, they now fake the hydrogen atom to accept a muon. Now, the muon is twice the mass size of electron, but takes on the characteristics of electron. And so they trick the hydrogen atom to accept the muon, and as a result now would reject its natural electron. It would reject it. And once that happens then the muon would decay, and as a result of its decay, it now decreased mass, and as a result you had a higher energy yield. And this was phenomenally demonstrated because the energy that was holding this electron in its outer orbit says, and under the law of physics says, everything's got to reach a stable state, right? So once that happens, then that energy is being released, and it's being released fairly safely. But this is a Cadillac idea. To build a muon generator would cost hundreds of billions and billions of dollars because the muon decomposes in a billionth of a second or less.
Is that because it's very synthetic in terms of its creation?
Yeah.
Right.
And so it destabilizes very quick. So they've demonstrated the fact that this process works. Well, while they were working on this, the United States government took this, give you a little bit of a testimony. In the same period of time I was developing the water fuel cell technology from 75 until now, the U.S. gave a group of scientists over $2 billion out in the Midwest to try to come up with the answer system. And recently they had notified Congress that they spent the $200 billion, but they didn't have an answer to the energy problem. Congress says, well, don't worry about it. The man down in Grove City, I'll start out with $3 in his pocket, seems to have the viable answer to the energy problem. So the Lord took me the way of faith, and instead of I would have loved to have the $2 billion, but the Lord said, go
You
by
got the
faith.
$2 billion, you may not have done it.
Right, that's true. Because you see, I would have, if I had unlimited funding, I would have developed a tech base to such an extent it looked like it come out of Space 25, right?
Your mind would be working in a totally different way.
Yeah. Okay, so the key was, how can we duplicate this thing in the muon process, but do it in a way that was very safely? So what the Lord had shown me was, number one, that in the process, that I need to stabilize and prevent the water molecule from occurring. Okay, so I have now to set up this condition to prevent the water molecule from combining together to go into stabilization. What I have done now is, when I had re-exposed the combustible gas atoms to what we call the hydrogen gas gun technology, in other words, the gas is going back through another high voltage field, and as it's going through this voltage field, then electrons are now being plucked off of that atom, and as a result, I'm now taking the combustible gas atoms into critical state. Now the question number one is, how much energy does it really take to trigger a thermonuclear device? Anybody know? Very low. Because all they do is they set up the subcritical mass here, the subcritical mass, and put them here, and goes into critical state. It is a physical, they've taken it from a physical to that and injected with laser energy to trigger the process to come up with the MIRV warheads. So it takes very little energy to do this. If you set up a destabilization state. So what I'm doing now is take the combustible gas atoms like the hydrogen atom and re-expose it to high voltage field to ionize that oxygen atom. Now, to aid the process a little further...
You're ionising the oxygen atom.
Right. Well, I can do it with the hydrogen too. I'm elongating it because I'm changing it. So what I'm doing with the hydrogen oxygen atom, in this case, I'm now subjecting that atom to laser energy. Now, when I subject this to laser energy, it now goes in even to a greater destabilization state. So I'm now taking it in a subcritical state, have I not? So as I also expose the hydrogen atoms to laser energy, they become weakened.
More unstable.
More unstable. And an example of this is that when the nucleus of an atom absorbs laser energy, I know all physics something's going to happen, right? So what takes place is that the hydrogen electron now starts to move farther away from the nucleus, and as it does this, the electrical attraction force becomes weaker. So she and I, no. Yeah, she and I are out on a basketball court. And she's the hydrogen atom, right? Now I've just zapped her with laser energy. Zap. And since I zapped her with that, she has now become into the weakened state. Now I'm the big oxygen atom.
I'm much out you.
And I'm 8 times bigger than you are, right? Now in the meantime, I've gotten 4 electrons or more plucked out of the oxygen atom. And an oxygen atom, if you will now take away at least half of its electrons, it acts like a baby. It says, if I can't have any more of my electrons, I'm going to blow apart. Well, I got 4 missing electrons, and the law of physics says I have to stabilize, right? Okay, now, so in the meantime, I'm 8 times bigger than she is, and I've got 4 times greater electrical power reason to grab a hold of her electron. So we're out on a basketball court, and then some guy who goes over and lights the gas, and she rushes to me to link up to me. And as she's coming to me to try to link up to me to form the water molecule, I'm looking at her electron, right? Now when I grab a hold of the basketball, which is her electron, who's going to win out, me or her?
You.
I'm going to win out. And if I win out, is she any more a hydrogen atom?
No.
No, you're a measly little proton. And all that energy that's in your nucleus, you got to release. And so it starts to release that energy that's been stored in that hydrogen atom because I plucked out the electrons. Since this has now been exposed to high laser energy, and it's in a destabilized state, it can't form the water molecule. And as a result of this, the implosion effect occurs and starts releasing tremendous amount of energy safely, and its energy yield at a minimum is 2 1/2 times that of gasoline.
So that's a nuclear reaction.
Well, it's called
It becomes a nuclear reaction at that stage.
yeah, well, when remember an analysis says they either go to another atom state or an implosion effect will occur. Since the hydrogen atom is the least of the atom structure, it can't stabilize into another atom. And therefore the implosion effect occurs and starts releasing all this energy, which now taps into that little apex or opening areas to allow the other energy to come in.
And is this coming out as what? Heat explosion?
Thermal explosive energy. Tremendous amount of energy.
This is what you want happening inside your internal combustion engine.
Oh, no, no.
Right.
This is the second stage.
This phenomenon I discovered this by accident, where I triggered a volume of gas in a metal container, all right, that had a leak. But the leak was just sufficient to control the amount of air going into it. and that thing heated up to super red hot before it exploded.
Yeah.
Stan, could I
This-
just ask a question here for a minute?
Yes.
If you could digress. Could you quickly explain to us what happens in different terms? Because it's the same effect, I believe, in a nuclear explosion and what you're doing there now. We deal with the same kind of
No.
concept.
No, it's entirely different. On thermonuclear, you're dealing with like the billiard ball effect, that you're trying to bombard the nucleus, the nucleus to knock out its components.
But you still
Okay.
count
It's
it
an
as that energy
explosion.
source, the key,
Well-
the fourth dimensional source, as you call it.
Well-
It still comes into it, doesn't it?
Well, no. This is a triggering process. All right, we're using voltage to set up the destabilization, and we are triggering it. Now, for an example, scientists were ignoring when they were looking at hydrogen fusion that 1/3, or the sun, is composed 1/3 of oxygen atoms. Now, in a particular process, these atoms have certain native intelligence to them. Just like humans have intelligence, animals have intelligence, so does atoms. And the oxygen atom has a very unique intelligence over any other atoms. What is it? It has the unique intelligence to trigger and release thermal explosive energy from other atoms. What proves that out? Well, in the gas combustion process,
Yeah, of course.
would need the oxygen atom to accomplish that. That's the only oxygen atom that has that capability.
Catalyst.
All right, now let's look at it another way, and then I'll go back.
I think you called it an implosion, where a nuclear reaction is an explosion.
And
Yeah,
also at least
you're
the
fragmentizing. You're actually trying to fragmentize. In this one, you're not trying to fragmentize.
What else was
You're
it
looking
about?
for the triggering mechanism to
I was looking
create
at
mass
the
density.
energy involved rather than the mechanisms concerned. I wonder whether there's a parallel there, just in terms of the energy involved.
Well, I never really. Now I'll think about that and give you an answer. Let me go calculate
Stan,
that.
what's left after you get this energy out? What's left?
Nothing. There is no fragmentation of particles. It's pure energy.
So the oxygen and the hydrogen both disintegrate into pure
Right,
energy.
and they're totally consumed.
I see.
They're totally consumed into pure energy. Okay, now another example of this is when you're burning logs.
Now you said 2.5 times the gasoline. You don't mean just
I'm
burning
sorry.
the gasoline.
I'm sorry. No. 2.5. It's 2.5 or 2.5 billion. I mean million. Million barrels. 2.5 million barrels of oil per gallon of water.
Ah, right.
That's the amount of energy going. Yeah, not 2.5 times gasoline. The 2.5 million barrels of oil per gallon of water. So when you go home, take a barrel of oil about 10 high, and go down the freeway all over where you come, and then hold up 1 gallon of water. That's 2.5 million barrels of oil. Now this is a triggering mechanism. I mean, once it triggers, it can't stabilize, so it has to continue to go on. And the analysis also is like burning logs. You know, in wintertime, have you ever burned logs? All right, now when you burn the log during a gas combustion process, are you not changing the atomic structure of the log? Yes, you're changing the atomic structure of the log, and as you're doing this, you're releasing that thermal heat energy from the log safely. Now you're releasing that energy up until the time that ash is formed, is it not? You know, as a little kid, my dad said, after we had the nice fireplace the night before, he said, son, it's time to clean up the fireplace. Well, you know, I was about 9 or 10. Well, Dad, what is this black stuff? Well, it's soot. Well, what's soot made out of? Well, it's made out of carbon atoms, right? So the gas combustion process was terminated or stopped when the carbon atom was formed. Now, if you would prevent the carbon atom from forming, would not the process continue to go on until another atomic structure is formed? The same analysis is here with the hydrogen fracturing technology, except the hydrogen atom is the least of its least of the atoms, so it cannot stabilize into another atomic structure. It goes on into an implosion effect and releases this tremendous amount of thermal explosive energy and releases it safely. This is why we can literally fly a tactical aircraft like an F-18 and F-16 and fly off the atomic power of water. And matter of fact, we are now retrofitting the technology to an equivalent to a Learjet like the T-39, which will show and demonstrate, in fact, they're doing the exact same thing of flying around the world on very, very little water.
Fly through clouds to pick up more fuel.
Yes. Well, if you so desire to do that. But it's easier to go down and scoop it out of the sea and then go on with it. So this is the basis of the water fuel cell technology, which now gave us the abilities to move in a bilateral movement anywhere into the economy. But I've also taken the technology even to higher states of development. And in the next area was developing what we call the EPG electrical generator technology. And the prior art in generating electrical energy was that, in fact, on a rotary type generator, they had an inherent design problem, which caused the opposing magnetic field problem. And what the problem being was that as the alternator, when you created the electromagnetic field to satisfy Maxwell and Faraday's law of electrical generation, it needs to pass a magnetic field through a coil of wire, right, in order to generate electrical energy. Well, under the rotary type generator, whenever you would electrically energize the armature, you would now create an electromagnetic field, which would create an electromagnetic circuit like you see right here. But the magnetic field, when you create it, has to jump across this air gap in order to allow the magnetic field now to go through this pickup coil. When I was making the presentation in Switzerland to the World Energy Symposium, they were working on what's called over-unity devices. And most of the over-unity devices had a limitation to it due to the fact that they needed to strengthen the permanent magnetic field. And in order to do this, they have to add mass to it. And when they add mass to it, then you needed more energy to exert to move the increased mass. And so it became inherently a limiting factor in trying to come up with over-unity devices. So the development was, can we also produce electrical energy at a very high magnitude and yet be able to comply with the law of economics and link it to the fuel cell technology? And to do this, we had to overcome the prior state of the art. Now, the prior state of the art required that you had to feed two forms of energy source into the system. The first one is, in this example, you had to feed in 120 watts of electrical power to create the magnetic field. Now, since the magnetic field was now jumping across the air gap through the stator ring and completing this electromagnetic circuit, then you had to add a second energy source to it. You had to add mechanical energy to the process. And if you take an ordinary car alternator and you try, once you apply 12 volts at 10 amps, then at 120 watts of power, that magnetic field is so strong that it would take a 7 horsepower motor in order to be able to turn this armature in order to pass the magnetic field through the pickup coils to generate the electrical energy. So under the prior state of the art, says you can never produce more energy out than you put in the system because of this inherent problem, which we call the opposing magnetic field problem. You know, if you take two permanent magnets, you put it together and you pull them apart, it takes a lot of energy, right? So it takes a lot of energy to break this electromagnetic field in order to produce electrical energy by allowing this magnetic field to cut through this pickup coil. So the key was, how can we bypass and overcome the prior state of the art limitations and yet produce a phenomenal amount of energy and do it economically? Now, we're using the water as the fuel source, and so we link this technology to the water fuel cell to give us the abilities to produce an unlimited electrical energy source as well as an unlimited gas source. The first thing the Lord had me to do was come up with, to solve the opposing magnetic field problem, is that He now had me to come up with a closed loop system. Now, when I tell electronic engineers, the Lord's gave me a revolutionary electrical generator, here's the following characteristics. It has only one moving part. It has no bearings. It has no contact brushes. I can give you single or three-phase or multi-phase power output, and if that doesn't bother you enough, I can drop in a bucket of water and never short out. So I got a lot of them squirming in their chairs, but boy, they stopped there laughing right after I talked to them. Now, anytime you can get a three-star general out of his chair in 10 minutes, you're doing something, right? So when I was escorted into the Pentagon, they wanted to know this technology immediately. All right, now the Lord took to have me to come up with a non-magnetic tube, as you see here, because I want to eliminate the movement of the electromagnetic field. I'm now going to take a pickup coil and wrap it around the tube to satisfy Maxwell's Faraday's law of electrical generation. And then on this side, I'm going to put a gas accelerator here, or particle accelerator. This way I'll just put gas accelerator. And now fill this tube up with a permanently magnetized gas. Now, the reason why the EPG electrical generator system was never in existence prior to this time is because there was no form of natural gas, magnetized gas that existed at room temperature. And as a result of that, we had to develop a way of producing the magnetized gas in such a way that we could stabilize it at room temperatures. If we could do this, then we would now solve the opposing magnetic field problem. And when I fill this up with a magnetized gas, this magnetic field now emanates around the non-magnetic tube. Now, General Abramson said to me, if you could show me how you could sustain that electromagnetic field, he said, you got the world's most efficient electrical generator. Well, General, now you're saying this in front of your technical people, not me. And the answer to that question was, I said, well, General, if this chalk was a magnetic bar, a permanent magnetic bar, the magnetic field would go from end to end, would it not? Now, General, what would happen if I would take this magnetic bar now and I extend it around to form a circle without any air gap? Which way would the magnetic field go? It would go around the ring, would it not? Like a toroidal core? And that General got right out of his chair because he realized the only energy input into the system now will be only to move the magnetic field, not to create the magnetic field. So if I would now move it in such a way that the magnetic particles would now pass through the pickup coil and I transverse the pickup coil, would I not now satisfy Maxwell's and Faraday's law of electrical generation? So am I now, question, breaking the magnetic field? No. The only thing I'm doing is I'm moving the magnetic field through this tubular structure. Therefore, do I have the opposing magnetic field problem associated with rotor electric generators?
Yes, you do. You still have it. Well, from what I'm seeing here, you get it by back EMF created in the coil that's producing the electricity. There's a back EMF.
Oh boy,
opposing magnetic field.
we'll get into discussing that. On a car alternator, for an example, you have 33 turns as an example of back EMF, and we'll get into this in a minute. But on the back EMF, under analysis, if you apply 12 volts at 10 amps across the field of the alternator, and the alternators are stationary, move it. And you cannot move that alternator.
I agree. You
Yes,
get rid
you
of that
can.
one. You get rid of
Yes.
that problem, absolutely. But you still have an opposition to the movement due to the generation. As soon as you start drawing current out of that coil,
And
you
we'll,
get opposed magnetic field.
we'll go into that.
Oppose the gas magnet.
Yeah, we'll go into that.
So what
Yeah,
moves
you
the
have.
magnetic particles in that tube? Is it the gas accelerator?
Pardon?
The gas accelerator's moving the
Moving the
gas.
particles
Yes, it's a
around.
gas accelerator moving the part.
Okay.
That's
Right.
what sort of gas is it?
We'll get into that. Well, for a long time, the two things I wouldn't discuss in the seminars back at State is number one, how do you restrict amps in a dead short condition? I wouldn't tell them the voltage intensifier circuit. When the power structure had come against me to try to destroy me, they couldn't answer that question. The patent always had that technology for many, many years. And so every time I'd ask them, they said, well, how do you restrict the amps in a dead short condition? They couldn't come up with an answer. You see, I had to invent both the voltage intensifier circuit as well as the electron extraction circuit. And as a result of that, was shown and demonstrate the capabilities of what we can do. Now, in this case, for an example, let's just go on with analysis and then we'll get into the EMF of the coil. If, for an example here, if I would now put a non-magnetic turbine wheel here and I hook a small little, or hook an electric motor here, the question is, how much energy does it really would take to move the magnetized gas through this closed-loop circuit? It would not take very much energy. It would not take a 7-horsepower motor in order to move the magnetized gas through this pickup coil. Now, since I don't have to take a great deal of energy to do that, how big, if I hooked the electric motor to this non-magnetic turbine wheel, how big would the electric motor be?
Little screw cage.
This would be right, the little small one. Now I could operate this electric motor by AC power, but if I didn't have AC power, could I use solar?
Yep.
Now I'm not talking about using solar cells, banks of solar cells that go cost you $144,000 a piece. I'm talking about 2 or 3 little solar cells that are about yay big. Okay, you ever see these little cars going around with the kids play with, solar cars? All right, now if I don't have solar energy available, could I use hydraulics to move the gas? But how about
Human power.
steam power? Steam power, human power?
I can use the energy generated by the coil.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that. How about wind power? Can I use wind power?
Yeah.
All right, now I'm not talking about the gigantic windmills like NASA had. You ever seen these popular science where they have these gigantic wind blades and all this stuff? It's going up around 320 feet high. Why do they need these gigantic blades?
You need 7 horsepower.
Yeah, you need to overcome the opposing magnetic field problem associated with it. Well, now if I don't have the opposing magnetic field problem,
So
will my windmill leave out like that?
Yep.
Could I hook it on the front of the car, and as you go down the road, the windmill
Yep.
will now move the magnetized gas, produce electrical energy, go through the voltage intensifier circuit, restrict the amp, voltage to take over to produce the hydrogen gas to run the car. Could I do that?
Yep.
Am I defying any laws of physics?
No.
Okay.
So what
Why would
you're
you
saying
need?
is
Why would you need the hydrogen producing the equipment when you can just use it with an electrical motor?
Well, we'll get into that too. For an example, it's a known fact. If, for example, an electric motor does not have the horsepower sufficient enough to meet the work demand load of the internal combustion engine, we don't have 25 to 30 to 40 years to convert over to a new power system.
No.
And it must be, we must go to a retrofittable energy source. All right. Now that brings me to another situation. I'm going to get off of this and go back a minute, because there's one area of technology that has always been asked.
One question
Move back.
before you leave.
Yeah.
What you're saying then is once you take the opposing magnetic force out of that field, it requires next to no energy to rotate its flow,
No, we'll get into that. It's always going to take energy input in the system.
but not much.
Yeah, but we'll go on even to higher technology. I'll leave this right here and go to the next board here, which I did not talk about. There's another very important dynamic phase to the development of the water fuel cell, which is primary importance. And this phase is the ability to adjust the burn rate of the hydrogen gas to co-equal fossil fuels. Now that was the number one technological breakthrough that gave us abilities to have a retrofit energy systems. Now out in California there was an outfit that was spent $2.5 to $3 million to try to develop a hydrogen-powered motor, and they shut it down because they said we need new exotic materials. They use ceramic materials, they get super hot, you hit it and it vibrate and crack. All right, so they shut the systems down. Now we needed to be able to get the existing cars running, the existing trucks running, and get it in an economy quick. So the key was, how could we be able to adjust the burn rate of the hydrogen gas to co-equal that of all of the fossil fuels? Now if I could do this, then the water fuel cell technology can be very quickly implemented into the economies of the world to stabilize the economy of the world when we're going through this crisis. So in order to do this, several things came into being. One was that, for example, the fuel cell not only has hydrogen atoms in it, but it also has oxygen atoms, does it not?
Yeah.
And it also has non-combustible gases in it. Inherently, there's a characteristic of water. And all the natural waters in the world have between 17 to 19% per volume of ambient air gases in it. Now, when ninth grade science class, I asked a question to the teacher, said, well, when you strike a match, why does not the earth burn up? Well, the reason why the earth doesn't burn up is because the bulk of ambient air is composed of non-combustible gases, or gases that do not support the burning process, like nitrogen and your rare gases like argon. Okay? So because of this, the atmosphere doesn't burn up. Now, when we release the hydrogen and oxygen gases through the electrical polarization process under resonance, then we now automatically adjust the burn rate of hydrogen. I'll put it back up here again. The burn rate of hydrogen from 325 centimeters a second down to the burning levels of 43, 42, 41, and this would be gasoline, to gasoline or even to diesel fuel. And automatically, that when you release the hydrogen and oxygen from natural water, you're also releasing the non-combustible gases from water, and you're adjusting the flame down to around 47 centimeters a second. Now, when I was filing the patents in the United States and in the international areas, they didn't know what I was talking about. The prior art was styrmetrics. Styrmetrics basically was taking the hydrogen atom, go through an orifice, and the hydrogen would hit a hot plate, and then the hydrogen would intermix with the oxygen, and then that combustion with the energy going in the hot place now could release some of the energy in the hydrogen. The problem with that, the prior state-of-the-art technology, was that it took a tremendous amount of energy into the hot plate in order to come up with the gas combustion process. But inherently, when we release the gases from water, it adjusts around 47 centimeters a second, and when we light the gas, even to melt steel, it's a self-sustaining system. And it blew their minds, and in fact, that we could really do this. And we went on further with it to give an illustration of it, because when they asked me, the United States is a very highly scientific country, right? So when they approached me and said, we don't know what you're talking about, adjusting the burn rate of hydrogen, I said, if I give you the answer, will you give me my patents? And of course I gave them the answer, and consequently received my patent. To give you an example of this, what I'm talking about is that if you would have a flash tube, that this would be a flash tube here, and you fill this flash tube up with hydrogen and ambient air gases, and you would spark it at one end, then the burn rate in 1 second would travel about 325 centimeters in measurement. Now, if I would fill the tube up with natural gas in ambient air, we found out that it would burn around 42 centimeters per second. So it became very obvious then that just as we could sustain and maintain the burn rate of the hydrogen and oxygen gas around 47 centimeters a second by using the non-combustible gas as a modulator. Now what I mean by here's the oxygen atoms, and now you subject it to a modulating gas, and this is the oxygen atom you see right here. And so as a result of this, that the modulated gas, or the non-combustible gas as you see right here, slows down the speed by which the oxygen atom unites to the hydrogen atoms. And as a result of this, you now slow down the speed by which these two gases will go into combustion. So it's quite obvious that if we now would subject natural gas or take hydrogen, we now can inject more non-combustible gas in the process, and we can take it right down to the burning levels of natural gas or gasoline or diesel fuel.
So all you have to inject is the air.
Right. So now we got a third component to the technology to comply with the law of economics. The only thing I'm using now is natural water, right? Voltage, which I'm not, is a non-consumable source in electronics, right? Now I'm using ambient air. Now if you guys, anyone can come up with cheaper commodities than that, let me know and I'll go pat him on the back. Okay, so now that gives us the ability to use an ambient air in the process. Now when you look at an internal combustion engine as an example, then you, as a design engineer, you will look at the internal combustion engine in 3 ways. And as you see here, now when we feed this in, the gas coming in, get my little spark plug here, that when the gases go in, number one, the internal combustion engine is a mechanical drive device, isn't it? Got us here today?
Yep.
Okay, secondly, is it not an air pump? Yep. Does it take the pump and sucks it into the carburetor?
Yep.
Right? And shoves it out the exhaust.
Yep.
Thirdly, is it not a manufacturer now of non-combustible gases? Yes, because as the ambient air goes in and mixes in the gas compression process, there's 2 things simultaneously. It consumes the oxygen atom and also consumes any burnable product in the air, so its byproduct is non-combustible gases. So it's very easy now to take the internal combustion engine, take the fuel cell over here, the water fuel cell technology, come up in here, meter mix it with the exhaust gases, and as a result of meter mixing, now we can take it and take it back up, and we now automatically adjust the burn rate of the hydrogen gas to co-equal gasoline and diesel fuel. Now since I'm using the ambient air up here, how much is it costing me? Now Zippo, right? So it takes and does it comply with EPA standards? Yes, because non-combustible gases, the air going through the process does not interact with the process, so you're not changing the status quo. So when they talk about it's impossible to do something, it's only to the creative imagination of the technology. Okay, so now we take this technology, the non-combustible gases, is that we now can take hydrogen, we can take air and expose it to the flame to create non-combustible gases, and now we have a way of taking and transporting hydrogen gas through conventional gas grid systems without ever changing it. Now the prior art says that you have to take hydrogen gas, cool it down about 465 degrees below zero, you got to put it under a lot of pressure, and you got to truck it down the road. You spend a lot of energy to move the hydrogen down the road. But by simply meter mixing now, non-combustible gases from ambient air, you can now adjust the burn rate of hydrogen less than that of your standard fossil fuels. And guess what? You don't even have to change even the control knobs on the distribution lines in order to get it transported. So all of this is still now compliant to the law of economics. So that was the number one major invention, was to be able to render hydrogen safer than that of natural gas. And of course the quenching circuit technology gave us the ability. Now another area that we developed to comply with the federal and the state safety code regulations is we developed what was also called the quenching circuit technology. And in all probability, if the NASA would have had this technology, our astronauts would not have died in vain. But to give you an example of this, as an example of this form of technology, I'll go like this. It is a requirement on the gas ignition that the hydrogen and the oxygen atom must unite together to bring on spark ignition, right? So we found out that the fuel cell is a multi-gas generator. It's producing and releasing the ambient air in the form of non-combustible gases in the process. So we found out that if we pass it through a very narrow passageway, somewhere along the line, the non-combustible gases are going to separate the hydrogen and oxygen gases and come up with a no spark zone. So as a result of this, we now had developed a 100% fail-safe way of igniting the gas and maintaining it with a 100% anti-spark back device, irregardless of gas volume or pressure. And the simple technique was to use the non-combustible gases to give us the quenching effect inside. Now the materials we used in the quenching disc and supporting the high temperature flame was for like ceramic material, like aluminum. The ceramic materials generally go up to around 3,000 degrees before they start getting real soft and melt down. But we can support flames anywhere from 2,005 to 10 to 20,000 degrees and not melt the ceramic material, because the non-combustible gases not only prevent spark back into the system, but it also elevates and controls the speed by which the oxygen atom is now being released into the air under pressure. And as a result of this, the non-combustible gases acts as a cooling agent between the flame and the ceramic material, and it's actually cool to the touch. So that simple thing now gave us the abilities to comply with the Federal Highway Safety Code regulations. And of course that technology took us to the quenching tube, by which these small little passageways acts as the quenching element, and now you can pass the fuel through this quenching tube, and as a result you can shoot it with a tracer bullet or burn it with a lighter, and it will not spark back into the generator. That gave us the ability to retrofit now use the cars.
What size are those holes?
Right, well, there can be 15 to 25 thousandths. Okay, and if you want to mix it a little bit more, you now can add more non-combustible gases to it. So if you cycle more non-combustible gases with it, the holes can elongate even though a little greater than that. Okay, so that gave us the abilities to retrofit the fuel cell to existing technology. But as we mentioned a little while back, now we have shown that voltage disassociates the water molecule. We show the circuitry, the abilities to restrict the amp level and allow voltage to take over, but we need to produce a lot of electrical power. Now, most of the electrical power plants are being propelled by coal or gas or what have you. We can use the water to do this. But there's cases now where we need higher energy yields. And so the EPG system was developed for this purpose. One is, I was showing you, with the magnetized gas inside the closed loop tube, we're using various methods to propel the gas. Now, in this particular case, we were talking about the electric motor driving the non-magnetic turbine wheel, which could be converted to wind power and what have you. If I wanted more power output of this generator, what would I do? Could I put another pickup coil here?
Yep.
And could I put another pickup coil here? So power output of the generator is determined by what?
The amount of coils.
Right, it's determined by, number one, the strength of the magnetic field, the velocity of that magnetic field, the number of turns per coil, and the number of coils, right? So all of these, do these not comply with the power factor of electrical power generation? The only thing I've done now is I have eliminated the opposing magnetic field problem, which was the greatest problem in electrical power generation. Now I'm a little tired of the non-magnetic tube, and so in some cases I now have put in an electromagnetic pump. And I come over here with an electronic pulsar, and I now want to produce an electrical generator that has no mechanical moving parts to it. Now in this analysis, if my eraser was a magnet, and I would put the magnet close to the magnetic gas, would it lock onto the gas? Right. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, now, so if I move the permanent magnet, would I now move the gas?
Yeah.
So therefore, if I now take this coil and I energize this coil to produce an electromagnetic field, and I deflect this magnetic field in a vertical direction, would I not now move the gas?
Yep.
Where's the bearing?
There ain't one.
Where's contact brushes? Can I now either hook this up in series or parallel arrangement, come up with any power output I so desire?
Yeah. What about the geometry of that system? Can you not refine that so that you were describing this in terms of a square?
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, but that's not the geometry of it in real terms.
No. geometry in real terms, it is now going circular in spiral configuration. Were we talking about that last night?
Acceleration, right. Acceleration.
Yeah. Now, the key to it is, for example, if I had the electromagnetic pump here, and I now had the magnetic tube like this
It
around.
becomes a coil.
All right, now it goes to coil. Now, if let's take an analysis of this. Let's say that coming into this, this had a given magnetic field strength. Now, in electronics, if I would take a coil and I wrap this coil many turns, the more times I'd wrap it, the stronger the magnetic field would become, right? So if I had 1x magnetic field here, and I coiled this now, and let's say I coiled this 100 times, what's the magnetic field strength of this?
It becomes exponential.
All right, so therefore it's 100 times. All right? So I now start to wrap the coils around this circular pathway, this coil pathway, as you see here.
Coil on a coil.
Coil on a coil. Now my power output is determined by, again, the strength of the magnetic field, right? The velocity of the field. And what's my next equation? The number of wraps, right, of the coil, and the number of turns per coil.
Gives you field strength.
It gives me tremendous field strength. Okay, so here I'm using now an electromagnetic pump to produce the electrical energy. Now, when you get to EMF fields, there's a reason why this was developed this way, is because the next question is, I want to eliminate as much as possible Lenz's laws. Lenz's laws. Okay, so the prior state of the art says here I have a coil, and I'm now moving the magnetic field through this coil, and I'm now moving it perpendicular to the coil. So I have tremendous opposition in moving that magnetic field, as he was pointing out, right? Well, now, can I move a magnetic field inside another magnetic field? And could I do it in a way that minimizes the amount of opposition?
Coherent.
Absolutely.
Coherent.
Yeah, because under this analysis, the magnetic fields are moving perpendicular, so you have opposition. But if I moved it through this way, I have a minimum amount of opposition to the movement of the field, right? So when you develop an EMF field of a coil, which way does the EMF develop?
At right angles to that.
Yeah, it develops away from the coil. That's the EMF.
So you take it with the coil on it.
Yeah, so now you got a situation that,
Well, you change the whole load of electronics.
well, but, am I defining laws of physics?
No, you're not a cross now.
Yeah, okay. So here is the magnetic field of the gas. That's the gas, right? And this is the EMF field. So therefore, can I not pass this magnetic field through this magnetic field and have minimum amount of opposition?
Cross.
Right? So when they say they cannot do it, it's the way you should look at the technology.
So we've developed technology that's produced that effect, but that
Yes.
effect need not necessarily be like that as you prove.
Yes. So therefore, I have eliminated or reduced Lenz's law down to minimum, because I'm moving this magnetic field inside another magnetic field, which gives me the least amount of opposition.
Still getting the same pickup in the coil, though.
Sure. Absolutely. So
And the axis is a 0 point.
Right.
Theoretical.
the center of anything is negligible force.
Right.
There's a negligible force in the center.
Theoretical axis.
Right. So the differential is from 0 on out. And so therefore we have the ability to move the magnetized gas with very little opposition to it. Now you link this up with a water fuel cell, and a water fuel cell now is producing the electrical energy. Can I not increase that electrical output still further?
You control it.
All right, now when you move the magnetic field through that alternator, that field moves at a very slow pace, very slow. So now can we increase the speed of the magnetic field? And can we not do it in a way that we can increase power output still further? So we've taken the technology now, even to a very higher state. We have now taken it to a point of solving the problem of over-unity devices by simply now injecting laser energy input into the magnetized gas. Now what I want to do is give an analysis here. Now let's say, for an example, this is exit. All right, now I want to increase power output still further. And I'm now starting to inject laser energy into the magnetized gas. Now the key was, how can we increase the magnetic field of mass, or increase the magnetic field without increasing mass? Now if you're doing that, you can do something. Now we talked about the coil wrapping, but another classic example is if I had the magnetized gas here, it's a phenomenal effect that if I would inject laser into the process, this electron would move out to a higher orbit, would it not?
Yeah.
Now in the law of physics, I better stop. In a mechanical drive system like the electromagnetic pump system to drive the magnetized gas, I pointed out in the development of the electromagnetic pump system that will drive the magnetic gas and all of its physical parameters in producing electrical energy very economically. Now, the question now comes, can we produce large amounts of electrical energy by moving the magnetic field even or close to that at the speed of light? Because the magnetic field movement through a rotary electrical generator is relatively very slow. Now, the key to higher power generations was in the areas, like on over unity devices, as we have mentioned, is that the prior art limitation was that to increase the permanent magnetic field, you had to increase mass, which meant you had to increase the energy input in to move the mass, so that inherently became a detriment to trying to produce electrical energy. So can we not now, for example, go ahead and then amplify the electromagnetic field of the mass without increasing the mass? And what we found out was that as you inject the laser energy, and the nucleus is absorbed in the magnetized gas nucleus, then this electron now will move out to a higher orbital state. And we know that under the law of physics that when you do this, something's got to happen, right? And
Anti-gravity,
yes. And one thing that takes place is that this electron, the electromagnetic field now, that holds it in its outer orbit becomes weak. And when this becomes weak, then for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Then this electron starts to spin at a faster velocity. And under the electromagnetic theory of magnetism says that whenever a negative charged particle moves through an electric static field, V, its byproduct is electromagnetic energy. You know, there's four forces that affects the atoms. There's electrical force, electromagnetic, weak and strong nuclear forces. It's the electrical force that really is applied to difference of potentials that applies directly to the atomic structure of the atom, and then all the other ones are just built on top of that. So in reference to increasing the magnetic field strength, it was quite obvious that all we had to do was inject and allow laser energy to be absorbed by the atoms of the gas to now cause the electron to spin at a faster rate as it's now moving away from the nucleus. This gave us the ability to increase the magnetic field without increasing the mass. And that was the answer to over unity devices. Now, we're producing now, as we inject the laser energy into the EPG system, I've now converted the non-magnetic tube into a light guide. Light guide. Now, what that means is that I've now put in a reflective surface inside the non-magnetic tube. So now when I inject laser energy, a bolt of laser energy into this system, and let's say, for example, this is a 10-watt laser, I'm now producing this magnetic field strength, A. Now, as I do this, then this laser energy, would it not now start moving through this corridor, reflective corridor, close to around the speed of light? So as a result of this, now this laser energy is starting to move this field, this pulse field, and it starts moving and bouncing back and forth and closes this loop system and produces it at an extremely fast rate close to the speed of light. So if I want to increase more power output, in one example, as we pointed out in the prior art, I could add more coils to it, right? Mm-hmm. But now I want to increase tremendous amount of power. Let's say, for example, that I would take this non-magnetic tube, and I would take it from here to Auckland. How far away is that?
20 miles.
20 miles. And then I take the tube and loop it back here. And I wrap 1,000 turns per coil around this non-magnetic light guide. And I hook these coils in series parallel arrangement all the way to Auckland and back here. And I fill it up with a magnetized gas, and then at the one end I set a laser to it. Now if I take a laser and I strike the laser, how fast would the light energy go through the tube to back to here?
Speed of light.
And then faster than you can blink your eyes, right? Less than a nanosecond, right? All right, so now if I take a 10-watt laser and I laser and I produce this magnetic field strength, it would now move close to the speed of light to come back to here. Now, when I get back to this point right here, I now laser it again. And I strike the laser again, and now I have an intensity of the field equivalent to B psi. And that now compounds itself and bounces around. When it gets back here again, I laser it the third time, and I produce a magnetic field 3 times in its intensity. Now imagine taking that laser, and I strike the laser 1,000 times, or let's say 1,000 times in a 10-watt laser. What would this magnetic field strength be equivalent to?
Gain exponential.
1,000 times.
Yeah, so it'd be 1,000 times greater than, 1,000 times from 10-watt laser. Okay, so I have what, a 10,000 or 100,000 watt laser equivalent of moving this gigantic magnetic field. So I'm now moving this magnetic field close to the speed of light. Now, the EMF field of the coil is only generated after the magnetic field goes through the coil wire, right? So as that bolt of laser energy is going through the gas, then there's very little resistance of this being moved through the coil, because as it's going down that coil, it sees an open corridor with very little resistance. Is that not so? So the EMF is only built afterwards. So if I would pulse this now and set this field and pulse it and hit it at this intensity, how much electrical energy do you think I can generate?
More than you ever want.
I can generate all electrical energy for all the major cities.
So in other words, you've done
In New
the equivalent
Zealand.
of breaking the sound barrier, you grew up in the EMF barrier.
Yeah, sure.
Are you saying that the laser will carry the gas around with it?
No. The gas remains stationary, and the laser action, in other words, the
expands
atoms,
and contracts.
right. And so, isn't that nice?
You've streamlined the thing just like a hypersonic aircraft.
Right.
It's leaving the shock waves behind it.
Right.
You've got ahead of the shock waves.
Right.
Huh?
Absolutely no resistance.
Isn't that amazing?
I found him in.
Now you link this electrical power generator with the water fuel cell technology. What can you not do? The technology is only limited to the imagination for you to put it to work.
That on its own, just as is just phenomenal.
Yes, but you can't run the entire economy off of this
No.
power, because as I pointed out earlier, an electric motor cannot handle the workload of an internal combustion engine. And under the law of economics, we don't have time, for example, to change to electrical drive systems for cars. Detroit, for example, is not going to change their production line when Stanley Meyer shows them how to take a $2.50 recycling tube, use the exhaust gases to adjust the burner to hydrogen gas to co-equal that of the fossil fuels, and run it off of water. So the law of economics dictates that this is the direction we'll go. But the evolution of its development will continue this, because, as I was mentioning to several others during our break, that the main centralized power systems have turned out to be the wrong approach in order to provide power, like in the United States, because in the interim period of time from the time the first power plant was developed, a lot of the copper wires or the electrical transmission lines are starting to crystallize. So we're starting to have breakdowns, the Brown effect occurring, or the electrical wires are now breaking down because of the high exposure of voltage, and they're crystallizing, and we don't have the copper to go ahead and replace those transmission lines, nor do we have the monies to be able to string the transmission lines. So one of the main philosophies now in the United States is to come up with a home power generation system. So we link this to the water fuel cell, and we're going to be releasing this unit, which will be the equivalent to the half size of a hot water tank, about 18 inches in diameter, and its average power draw will be 220, 300 amp draw capacity. And link this up to the water fuel cell, then we have an unlimited power source, very economic. And the only thing I'm using here is a tube, a bunch of wires, in the gas. Now, I would not point out how to make the magnetized gas for an extremely long period of time, because when a scientist comes into my laboratory and says, if you can show me how to stabilize the magnetized gas at room temperatures, you're doing something. And he's right, because this will set on an evolution like you will not believe. Now, in chemistry, and linking up the atoms, we're always under a natural state in order to link up the atoms to covalent link up. Now, there are a lot of ways of doing it. Now, there's 3 atoms that exist in nature that exhibits electromagnetic fields. There are iron ions, and there are nickel ions, and there are cobalt ions. And the key to the link up was to come up with a gas lattice that would stabilize at room temperature and amplify the electromagnetic field. So one of the techniques, this is not the only technique, but this is the technique that I'll relate. But there will be an evolution now in chemistry where hundreds of millions of new chemical compounds will come about as a result of this. Under the prior state of the art, there are such atoms now in this particular case to make a magnetic gas lattice. We're using iron and iron ions and argon as an example. Iron, cobalt, and nickel are atoms. Now, most they look at it as a metal substance, but really they're composed of the same atomic structure. They only have different number of protons and different number of electrons, right? All right, so if you get them down into the atomic structure, then they operate and function just like any other atoms do. And now, the reason why iron as an example, or cobalt or nickel exhibits electromagnetic fields is because all of their electrons rotate in the same direction. The reason why the wood and so forth does not exhibit an electromagnetic field is because their electrons pair together and they rotate in opposite direction. Okay? And has been examples of taking atoms and exposing them under plasma under real high temperatures and high pressures, and they would start to exhibit an electromagnetic field. But tremendous energy must go into that type of system to try to generate the magnetic field. So the key is, how do you stabilize it? Well, as we pointed out earlier, that when I took the combustible gas atoms, which we call the hydrogen gas gun, and we exposed that atom to a high voltage field, we got the ionization effect occur, right? Now in this particular case, I'm using iron and argon atoms to link up. Now, traditionally, argon is an atom that doesn't link up to anything. It's chemically inert. Why is it chemically inert? And the reason why it's chemically inert is because its second electron orbit is composed of 8 electrons.
Complete octave.
Right, and as it has its 8 complete electrons, it doesn't want to covalently link up to anything. Well, now, the question is how do you look at it to accomplish the problem? Well, if that has 8 electrons, why can I not now expose the argon atom to high voltage and pluck off its electrons? Can I not do that? Huh? Can I now inject laser energy into the process that aids the process of now aiding to knock off the electrons? In other words, if I had an atomic structure this way, then the electrons would go from that orbit to K, L, M, and N orbits, and then eventually be ejected off by the voltage. Can I not do that?
Yeah.
What proves that out? How about an argon laser? It does it? All right, so therefore, the point in the hydrogen gas gun technology, by the way, the hydrogen gas gun technology can be reduced down to the size of a spark plug or the fuel injection port of a F-18 or F-16. So you can miniaturize this thing down tremendously. Now, in this technology, matter of fact, when you send laser energy into this process, not only could we generate the electrical links for all the cities in New Zealand, but I can reduce it down to the size of an IC chip and replace the battery in electronics. Isn't that phenomenal? Okay, now, get back on this a minute. If I want to be able to covalently link up with atoms that normally do not link up, then can I not just simply pluck the outer electrons of that atom and now use it as a covalent link up? So if I pluck 4 electrons from here, from the argon atom, would it not now link up with the iron ions that also have missing electrons?
Which was not possible before.
Yes, and the reason why it wasn't possible before was the invention of the VIC circuit. The VIC unit restrict amp flow, right? Now, like a neon tube, you take a high voltage a neon tube, it produced the light, it plucked off the electrons, right? And then when it was plucking off the electrons, it allowed electrons to go back in the process to stabilize it, to go ahead and pulse again 60 cycles to release more energy, right? All right, on the VIC unit, though, when you pluck the electrons, you're not allowing electrons to go back into the process. Now, so therefore, if I would now expose these two opposite gases, and I now set and inject laser energy in the process, and plucking off their electrons, if I pluck off their electrons, would they not covalently link up? Absolutely, they would have to link up. So now I have a gas lattice now, where it now can exhibit the electromagnetic field. So if I were to put the gas lattice now inside...
You're saying the gas lattice is argon and ion?
No. Argon and iron ions, or nickel or cobalt, or any combination thereof. Okay, this is only one example.
Where do you get the ions from?
Well, if you have iron, can you not decompose an iron block into iron ions, and then made up of atomic structure of atoms?
Once you knock the electrons off, that's the whole thing, isn't it?
Right. The key was artificial knocking it off. As a result of this, hundreds of thousands of millions of new chemical compounds will come about. The prior art in chemistry is if you had atom A here, and say, well, I need atom B down here, they may have had to put a whole string of other atoms to come down here to atom X, right? And the reason why they did that was because of covalent link-up of the atoms, right? All right. Why can I not bypass the step and knock off the electrons here, and knock off the electrons here, and control it to such an extent that they have a match?
So you can get like quarter tones in the atomic structure instead of having the harmonic Pythagorean structure. You can vary that along in great further shades.
Right. Absolutely. You see that? Am I defining law of physics?
It's like artificially produced isotopes.
Right. Or artificially simply lit. Well, isotopes, if you want to talk about isotopes, you're talking about putting more, 2 or 3 electrons into the orbit and everything. What we're doing is plucking the electrons out. All right, we're plucking it out. I'm injecting laser energy into the process to simply aid the process. In other words, here's the atom, and I'm now injecting the laser energy. Right?
What sort of laser energy?
And,
Is it helium, neon, or argon, or
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Anything.
I mean, on certain atoms, it will take a different frequency of laser energy, but you simply tune in on the laser frequency of absorption, and so it does it. So basically, a photon light source works very well on it. Here are your energy orbits, and again, you're bouncing from K, L, M, and N. So if you subject this, you're knocking off the electrons. You're subjecting it to a tremendous high pulse voltage. I'm now plucking electrons. I still have the laser energy here to keep it from going back to stable state. If I intermix those chemicals in the hydrogen fraction technology, they will covalently link up.
What sort of voltage do you need? Is it 10,000, 50,000?
Doesn't matter. Very little. How much? See,
No,
in kilos.
the high voltage plugging device.
Yeah. It doesn't, it can go from 2,000 volts to 10,000 volts, or take it to 20,000 volts up to 90,000 volts. It depends on what type of application that you want. The key was that we could produce hundreds of thousands and millions of cubic feet of magnetized gas in the garage by using the hydrogen fracturing technology, or hydrogen gun technology to give us this ability. So now we're linking, unlike atoms that heretofore you could not link up naturally. We're artificially linking them up by plucking out their electrons. So when you expose the gas to an external magnetic field, then what happens is the magnetic field of this iron ion now starts to link up and you produce an electromagnetic flux line, like so.
Which is a composite of the whole lot.
Yes, right, all the way around the tube, all the way around the non-magnetic tube. Now the reason why I'm using argon in this case is that there's some characteristics to argon. The characteristics being that the argon is like a lubricator. Second thing is that it's an anti-static device. It doesn't like to transmit electrical energy in it. And it also has the ability that's a magnetic shunt. It doesn't like to be magnetized. And as a result of that, then when you expose it, you're now creating this electromagnetic field. Isn't that amazing? So not only are you're linking up the gas lattice by covalent link up, I'm also now linking it up by electromagnetic link up from one atom structure to another to produce the magnetic flux line. So it's quite obvious now that if I would now take this and I would expose it to the electromagnetic field moving through the pickup coil, would I not generate electrical energy?
By the way, Stan, you'll be making superconductors totally obsolete, won't you?
Yes.
Totally obsolete.
Yes. Yes. The superconductor is basically trying to transmit electrical power without, least resistance on it. Okay, so that's the basic principle of why the EPG system works. Any questions?
I'm still confused about the ions. How you manufacture them?
Well, if you go back many years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago, or in the 40s, 30s and the 40s, they were using ion generators to generate ions from many different metals, even including iron and cobalt and nickel. So,
you mean like an ion generator, a negative ion generator?
Sure. And you take your metals and you decompose it into the atomic structure. There's a lot of ways of doing it, but there's too many hours to describe the apparatus.
What makes it a magnetic gas? Why would it be magnetic, not?
Well, because I'm using atoms that all of their electrons spin in the same direction. So if you have an atom that all of its electrons spins in the same direction, it will exhibit an electromagnetic field equivalent to the number of electrons that are spinning under the electromagnetic theory of magnetism, that whenever an electric charged particle passes through an electrostatic field, its byproduct is electromagnetic energy.
But iron by itself is not permanently magnetized. It's steel is, but iron wouldn't be.
Yeah.
So why is iron not steel? I don't know the other way around. And why would that not be the same thing as just normal iron?
Well, say that again now.
Well, iron, soft iron, is not
Right.
magnetic in itself, is it? Not
Yeah.
permanently magnetized.
True.
But steel is.
Yeah.
So why is that? You've got iron there. Why is it not? Why would
Well, the reason why that would, well, as I said, now I'm giving you an example. And I said any combination thereof. You can take any combination of structures to do it. Now, when you talk about creating the electromagnetic fields and you're coming up with a combination, you can take the combinations and mix it and expose it in the same process. The reason for that strictly is why it's holding the magnetic field. It's because it's allowing the electromagnetic spin to not pair together. All right. So in this particular case, the argon atoms are all pairing together and they're spinning in opposite directions. But it will stabilize to allow these electrons to spin in the same direction. But you can take any combination of any of the ion structures and put them together to create and enhance the
So
electromagnetic field.
you could use neodymium iron boron, for example,
Sure.
which is a very, very strong magnet
Right.
material.
Exactly the same thing.
And that's permanent.
Right.
It remains permanent. You get permanent.
Right. Right. You can use all the state of the art
Remains.
of what they're using today to enhance and stabilize that magnetic field. The real point being is that once you do this, you're not going to inject the laser energy and to amplify that electromagnetic field. So you're not restricted to just one. I'm giving this as an example of the approach. If I went to a more complicated, it may be a little bit more harder to understand. Okay, so that's the basis of the EPG system technology. Now we also have some advanced technology which we're not bringing out at the present time, and that's also in the atomic reduction process. So this technology has led us to alter the state of the atoms, that we can reduce the structure of the atom downward and then covalently link it up with unlike atoms again. So it's opening the doors in areas of
We can do anything literally with matter now.
yeah.
You
So
can
basically,
transmute.
transmutation is a fait accompli.
Well,
Well, it's going to.
Well, yeah. Again, it's only subject to limitation, to actually put it to work. So the real key is to communicate what we have done and why we're doing it. Because we're going to be faced with a very critical worldwide problem, I feel. If the Mideast, as I pointed out earlier, erupts into war, then there's a possibility that oil is going to be contaminated. If it's contaminated, we better start moving in one accord. Otherwise, the economies of not only New Zealand and other countries are going to be destroyed very quickly. But we have a way of doing it, and the way that we must accomplish it is to sit down there and decentralize the production of the system and decentralize it in installation and set it up as an independent business entities. And that's the vehicle which the Lord has shown me to do it very successfully in the United States, and we are doing this at the present time.
Well, we're ready to do
That's it.
Is anybody else who would like to take the floor and add anything?
Or ask any questions, or
Anything?
oh, here, obviously here.
Anybody opposed? Floor is open for any questions.
What's your purpose for coming here?
Well, the Lord pulled me away from the project and said to go to New Zealand.
He knows more.
And,
You started to see.
so I started asking some questions, and I'm finding out that New Zealand's importing about 50% of their oil into this country. So you're much like we are. We import 60% of oil to maintain our economy. If that oil is cut off, tomorrow you die, and we die. So the area is to communicate. I've been going to many countries all over the world, communicating and talking about the technology, and to say, hey, there's an answer. Because what we're talking about today, if it complies with the law of economics, and it complies with Kismet, to keep it simple, stupid, and it gives us an answer to the energy problem, then put this technology in the wrong hands, like the Mafia, or to the Arabs, or any other hostile foreign country. Then those countries that would be blocked with this technology would be destroyed economically very, very quickly. And those countries that would have access to this technology could be prospered very quickly. So it's paramount that, unfortunately, there are those who seek to destroy. and very few seek to build and to maintain. So I have imparted now all of this knowledge and wisdom, and now you have a great responsibility. As I had a responsibility in developing the technology under the Power and Authority Word of God and bringing it to this state, now I'm communicating to you. Now we can invent and develop this technology, show you that in fact we have an answered energy problem, but in the final equation, it's going to be coming down to you guys whether or not it's going to get in. So I don't know the laws in New Zealand. I don't know the people in New Zealand. I don't know their philosophy. I don't know the enemies against New Zealand. But I do know that as the time goes, you're going to have to need this answer, just like the other countries. And we've got to be able to somehow move in one accord to bring it about. And if we don't do it, don't rely on the government to do it, of any nation, and don't rely on any international corporations to do it, because they're not going to do it. It's going to come down to you and I, and the guy down the street that says, hey, we're going to pick up the challenge and pick up the ball and go. And if we don't do it, well then the work has been in vain.
Go ahead and do it. I mean, you've got patents on it. Are you looking for...
Yeah, what I'm starting to do now is to start the vehicle capable of doing it. Now, if I can develop the technology or the equipment, we are now in the Product Development Center in Worcester Courthouse, Ohio, and by which we take our tech base and we're now designing retrofit energy systems. Okay, that technology, as it goes forward now, OPAS here, what we're doing now, I'm starting to set up a congressional report, and we're starting to set up an area now by which we're going to bring the people of the world together and say, gentlemen, we've got a problem to solve. Bring the experts in, like the Project Manhattan style, project. Come in one accord and say, what are your energy needs? What do you need? We're going to house the engineers that's strictly going to be assigned for one particular area, like home heating system or the home electrical power generation system. This area here deals with military retrofit to the aviation industries here. So as we provide this knowledge, then we must organize people in New Zealand to go ahead and to say, hey, they have the facilities, they have the equipment, they have the plastic mold injection devices. Get a hold of the people that can produce the electronic circuit boards or the individuals to make the printed circuit boards or whatever it's needed to make the system. We'll provide the technology, we'll provide the engineering skills, but you're going to have to put together. And that's what we're after, is to mobilize...
no problem. You can provide what you just said and we'll do it.
Yeah, well that's the key, because no one man can do it. I cannot do it. There's only so many hours in a day. And
do you have any cautions about how to avoid coming unstuck or whatever, and getting set up to, from what you've come across with other people doing?
say that again now.
Any advice on the particular way to set up or the way not to set up to sort of go?
Not incorporate. You can talk about
not to. The key is that it has to be an independent business entity, not to incorporate. Corporations are geared for takeover. You can take over any corporation in the world, and they can control you very much. The reason why I'm very successful is, number one, I never incorporated. I'm a proprietor, and I operate under what's called the grandfather's clauses. And because I operate on the grandfather's clause, they cannot shut me down or regulate me to a point that I cannot bring the technology out. So I would recommend, I don't know the local laws in New Zealand, but I would say that they're basically the same. And so go to the small independent business. Number two is like I'm going to the plastic mold injectors or people that have already their facilities and their equipment. Say, look, you need a product to make money. I'm going to provide you the wherewithal to make the product in order to stay in business, and which will aid us. Now we're to set up a distribution center, maybe one, possibly two in New Zealand, that the parts will be made, go to distribution center where they receive the quality control check. Once it goes through the CQing area, then you will have hired out sub-assemblers or people who will take the various parts, go back and assemble it, test it, bring it back in again, put it in package form, and ship it out the door. So again, it's a good way to mobilize in order to mobilize quickly to get the power technology in.
Of course, the other thing this can do is it can generate thousands of jobs.
Yes.
Thousands.
Yes. I don't know what the unemployment here.
High.
So over 5%. You probably have to import people just to get the product, to get it in, to stabilize the economy. or just work harder. And the next key is that you're going to have to center as to what areas. If the Middle East crisis occurs, then you're going to have to get with me and say what areas it's going to need the power source quickly. Because I don't know what the food supply chain is in New Zealand.
It's trucks.
Huh?
Food supply is good.
Yeah, but after so many days, it's gone. See, it's 27 days in the United States. So
We've got a bit of help here because of the natural gas supply.
Yeah.
And we've got CNG and LPG is locally produced. So it helps a bit.
We have actually got quite a large oil supply, which is they can up the production.
About 70%
Yeah.
for a short term.
yeah, for short term.
Very
So,
short term.
so then you got a 30%.
See, like the natural gas here alone, they strip the hydrogen out of it before it's supplied to the motor car.
Yeah.
And the Auckland Gas Company takes the hydrogen out again when it gets here, but there's still a little bit left. So they take the hydrogen out of the natural gas when it gets to Auckland. So the natural gas cars are run on natural gas and gutless,
Yeah.
no power at all.
Yeah. What a waste. Yeah, most of the oil companies, you'll see today, the international ones are dispersing. They're divesting so fast it's unbelievable because they know that the raw material is no longer there. And so they're going in every areas that they can imagine, not concentrating on the areas of oil.
Like tobacco companies.
Huh?
Like tobacco companies.
Yeah. So maybe New Zealand, it seems like it's a little bit better off than the United States. There are other countries, like for example, like in the North Sea, England and some of the Scandinavian countries and other European countries felt that they were safe. That, well, we've got our oil reserves up here in the North Sea. Well, last year alone, the pressure in the North Sea dropped by 1/3, and it's dropping more today. So in 1 year, it dropped by 1/3 of its capacity. And don't think England is not vexing greatly today, because they're in a point of shutting down the nuclear power plants. In Sweden, it's in the process of next year or so they're supposed to be shutting down their nuclear power plants.
They want a bit more, isn't it?
Yeah. So.
Yeah, we've got Siemens down here trying to sell this government another its first nuclear power
Yeah,
station.
there is considerable interest in amongst the powers that be to put in nuclear stations in New Zealand.
Oh,
We're working on it now, so we've got to get in fast.
Yeah, they don't. They have not solved the problem on radiation and the hourglass effect.
They never will.
What plan of attack do you recommend? I know you've outlined this briefly as to how we should get this into operation, but what's your first move to sort of tie this all up so that people like myself and everyone else here can get involved?
Get back with me as soon as possible. My fax number is 614-871-8075. And write me and get back with me and how you feel that we can implement this technology. I know nothing of New Zealand. You live here, and you would know the best approach. So I need what you feel would be the most ideal approach to move, both from a standpoint of a national emergency situation, and the other one being in without a war condition.
Does it relate to, say, the application of natural gas on a motor car? You know how that's applied. Would it relate to that sort of situation?
Yeah,
No, sure.
A retrofit kit would be very similar.
A retrofit.
So there are natural gas fitters within this country already.
Yeah,
Oh, they could fit them without any trouble at all.
So the fitting equipment is there already. It's all in place.
Well, you can't hook it up. You can't hook it up to a conventional carburation system or an LP gas system. You cannot do that. No.
But what I'm saying is that these organisations that are got in the position of retrofitting a natural gas system to a motor car can, because of their experience, I see as being a natural person to go towards fitting the retrofit equipment, the hydrogen retrofit equipment to an ordinary motor car.
Yeah. Well, here again, it depends on who controls them.
What about the thought of actually doing a national news release on this, like one that they can't stop? And the way that we could do this is by having a car in New Zealand that runs on the fuel cell.
Now, let me give you a classic example. We were preparing a car to come to Australia and run in the Solar Australian race, right? And we were calibrating and debugging the pre-engineering unit, and the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, that we got through the fax machine the sponsors that was going to bring us over, the contract boiled out to be nothing more than a deed of property transfer and a bill of sale on the dune buggy. For the price of plane tickets coming off Australia to show how you can run a car on water, I will assure you we would have never got in the race the first day. The way that the contract was written. So unfortunately, there are those who seek not to allow it to come, and so it has to come by not through the federal government and not through the multi-international.
But the thing is, all these LPG fitters and so on, these gas fitters, have to be licensed to handle all the explosive gas and all that sort of thing, and so instantly regulations will try and stop this hydrogen cell.
Oh yeah.
For that, from that point of view.
There's no explosive gas until you put on the accelerator.
Yeah, that's right. See, it's a constant demand
Until
generator.
you need it.
So we solved
There's
these.
no
What's the powers
storage.
be of that?
Well, you can
It's in the patent. It's in the patent. It's in the patent.
Yeah.
There's this. I mean, you don't have the problem of storing hydrogen gas under high pressure.
Well, you got more water in the tank.
Yeah. So you see, like for example, on impact, you have an electronic jar switch on the. We got the green light to take technology and demonstrate it, like in the Indy 500, and we showed them, in fact, that the technology was ultra safe.
Safer than petrol.
Yeah, because it was electronically we can shut it down. If the fuel cell, let's say, is retrofitted to an existing car, then on impact it would activate the jar switch, it would shut down the electronic circuits, which would de-energize the system. So if on an impact, if the housing of the fuel cell was ruptured in any way, the only thing that's coming out is natural water.
Well, the things that sort of help us is maybe some copies of some of your go-ahead literature that has been approved in other places, so we can say, look, you know,
Oh yeah, sure.
work's already been done.
All of this would be provided.
I still
Is
think
there any
that
storage with the hydrogen and oxygen somewhere? I mean, you'd have to have something in order to start it.
just a
Just
tube from the
It's a
cell.
conversion process.
yeah, and just very little. You only need just a little couple of gas to do this. A couple of gas means nothing as far as you're going to spark ignite it. It's only going to release it out of a pressure release valve and just go pop, and that's it. So I've been designing.
So how do you start the engine? In the conventional way with a battery and a...
You touch the engine and leave it exactly as it is. You don't change the spark plugs. You change nothing on it. To retrofit to an existing car, all you do is pull off the gas tank. You put the fuel cell in place of it. You run your spark arrestor gas line from the fuel cell up to the front of the car. You hook it to a hydrogen injector system. And then you take one electrical lead, hook it to the battery of your car. You fill it up with water, turn the ignition on, start it, and run down the road.
Would you say that your case
And,
so far, sorry, have you finished?
One other area
And
is
you
that
mentioned the hydrogen injector. What's that? Is that something you produce or
It's produced on demand all the time. On demand.
they're already available?
yes, it's already available. So
To work on
it's,
vacuum, I suppose. The demand process, testing the vacuum in the inlet manifold all the time. So when you open your accelerator, the vacuum increases, and so therefore, when you open your butterfly and say your vacuum increases, it senses that you require more.
now we developed. If you see the pamphlet that I have on the dune buggy, look at the electronic control system up on the dashboard. That's referred to as your GMS unit, or your gas management system. And there's some unusual characteristics. What happened in the prior state of the art in running a car on hydrogen is they tried to go to a hybrid system, trying to take the technology that they had used in running gasoline and saying, well, let's try to see if we can run the car on hydrogen. And hydrogen has totally different operational characteristics. And so it was a requirement that a full and complete new design approach would have to be in order to allow the hydrogen to run very efficiently. And so the gas management system was developed to take care, and specifically it was designed around handling the hydrogen gas, because hydrogen, as an example, not only releases energy almost 3 times more than that of gasoline, but it also moves 3 times, the atoms move 3 times faster than air. So hydrogen has a very narrow window of combustion, and so it was a requirement that this narrow window of combustion would be maintained regardless of the RPM of the engine. Whereas in the prior state of the art, they simply peaked the operation of the carburetor around 60 miles per hour, and then as you go lower or higher, then the fuel mixture would change. So it became tremendously important for us to design the engineering retrofit to around the characteristic of the hydrogen atom to allow that engine to run very uniformly. Another limitation to the technology was they were trying, for example, to take hydrogen and put water down in the injection. That was mixing liquid with hydrogen, which became a very radical form of operations. In other words, the vehicle had to run at very high RPMs and had erratic starting conditions. So we've eliminated all of the prior art difficulties in running hydrogen. So when we run the car and demonstrate it, and you will get news of this as we bring this out, we'll show that in fact we have the engineering design retrofit solved in order to run that engine very, very smoothly. That's where we take our technology now and reduce it down to the IC chips. So under normal conditions, they're telling me that they can convert the electronics down to an IC chip in less than 6 months. But under wartime condition, we possibly could get it done within a week and a half. And all of our electronics was designed under TTL computer compatibility, which gave us the abilities to now miniaturize the circuitry.
Makes it a lot more stable than using something else too.
Yeah.
Two questions, Stan. How would you describe your converter kits at the moment in terms of their refinement? Do you see much more refinement being necessary, or are you a very refined system in operation right now, or close to?
Yeah, we are in the latter stages of debugging the system to give us to look at our performance and reliability performance. And it has been all of our electronics has been developed on the highest state-of-the-art technology. I had to invent a laser distributor and a laser accelerator. We had to design new electronic circuit logics to do this. Okay, that is all now being totally finalized for mass production. So we'll be running and debugging the systems to test it out to make sure all the electronic circuits are working properly. Once that is done, then the decision is go for mass production. And mass production simply entails getting with the experts in the field of the plastic industry. We'll be using Delron materials as the material for the unit because Delron has good characteristics and molding characteristics, and it acts as an electrical insulator and chemical inert to the process. And so once that decision is made, then we should have units out the door in less than 6 months.
So you are 6 months from a prototype for demonstration purposes?
Well, under normal, I would say 18 to 24 months. Under wartime situations, we could possibly have units out the door in
Yeah,
less
but
than
that's
6 months.
units out the door, that's not a prototype. I mean, the unit we have is like a prototype.
Okay.
That's called pre-engineering.
How close are you? Okay, put it this way. Suppose we were desirous of getting, in a condition here in New Zealand, a working model to demonstrate, not necessarily to power a car yet, but a working model to demonstrate the technology as a sales angle, if you like. How close would you be to that right now?
Well, that will be the production unit in 18 to 24 months.
So you're looking at quite a time lag.
I actually don't
No.
see it as important to actually having a demonstration model. I think it's probably more important to have a model that works and set in one system and sell that. and basically sell them from the point of view where you've got one working, the guy takes it and then you go and get another one. That has a mushrooming effect where you don't have to go and demonstrate. A word of mouth will look after that, because this is like, we all know how incredible this system is. It doesn't need to be demonstrated, it just needs to work.
It needs to be shown to exist.
No,
Well,
but that's proof of the pudding is in the fact that you've got one working.
That's right. So we need a working model.
That's what a working
Yeah,
model.
that's why the pre-engineering is now being finalized.
That's what I'm saying.
If you tell them.
The point is, if a person's got one, right, he's going to put one there, and the person goes, "Shit, where did you get that from?" And you find it, and it'll spread like wildfire.
Of course it will. Yeah,
You don't need to demonstrate it.
No, we need the first model I mean, the fastest way to get like you're going to need money to set up the terms, like small amounts of money, thousands, to set up the manufacturing procedures in New Zealand. And to generate that cash, we want to generate interest. And the way we can generate interest is with a working model.
Yeah.
We'd say, here it is, here's the water out of the tap.
But
pour it
then
in
you're
right
going
down
to
the
the
road.
financier to get the money.
We don't need to go to near a financier.
Yeah.
He will be offering us
Yeah,
money.
I will show you one thing. The day you have that unit sitting there, you don't have to sell the first unit.
Absolutely.
The only thing they're going to need, one thing, is how much and how fast can I get it.
Exactly.
And they're going to have a name. And what happened in the United States is that I had two businessmen when we were developing the technology, standing out the door waiting for me to talk to me. And I was on the phone in my laboratory, and all of a sudden I heard these two well-heeled gentlemen fighting outside. They were yelling at each other. They said, "I'm here first, I want my units, and I want mine." Well, the one guy was selling 100 homes and couldn't sell the homes because he had no fuel. And the other guy said, "Look, man, my industry's going down. I don't have any fuel to sell cars." And they're both right. And then I finally realized, well, the only way I can save it is to say, well, you put it on the first come, first served. In other words, you put the person's name down, and you say, well, give me a deposit X amount of money, and manufacturing unit 1,205 is yours. And when that's produced, you got it. So I don't think you're going to have too much money as far as...
So that's what I was saying. Similar position to do that with you in terms of getting the first unit.
Oh, absolutely. And the way I'm doing this is like in the United States, it's dealerships. I can't say they're franchises. They have to be dealerships. And dealerships is nothing more than a legal license to act on my behalf in business. And basically the license is around that you must do your business honestly and forthrightly according to the laws in your land. I mean, if you cheat and on your taxes and you get zapped, well then I'll give it to somebody else. And then there is a stopgap that you can't resell your dealership to some foreign entity. If you want to sell it, well then you have to sell it with the amount of monies that you originally have in it. And Water Fuel Cell makes will screen a person to say, hey, you're not selling this to an Arab. You know, like I had fought a tremendous battle where there were a certain group of Japanese that came in to try to block the technology for the world. And I'm assuring you, if they were very successful, we'd be talking, all of us would be talking Japanese. Because as I said, in the wrong hands, man, you can destroy the economy of the world, or you can manipulate the economy of the world. So it becomes important. So I've set the entity up in a way that you got to do it honestly and forthrightly. So it's a license, but I don't sell you the technology. And so the same philosophy we're doing in the United States, I'm doing it for every country of the world, to allow the vehicle to come in that we would be successful.
Stan?
Yes.
I reckon in 18 months' time, when your vehicle's off the assembly line, you'll have a hard job remembering New Zealand.
Well, I tell you, if you've been in our laboratory, we get responses from all over the world. And my purpose was to protect the technology for the United States as well as to the world, and the Lord has allowed me to accomplish the task. Now, the Arabs offer me over $1 billion cold cash to sit on the technology and don't do anything with it. Now, if you offered me money back in 1975, it would probably taken me about 10 billionth of a degree of a second to accept it. But it would not agree with me to go down into the Bahamas and watch the United States go or the other countries go. Unfortunately, when you develop something, you have a responsibility to that knowledge. And we're talking about responsibility stabilizing. You know, if the oil's cut off to us tomorrow and it's contaminated, you know, the food supply chain of the world is roughly around 27 days. After 27 days, or once that food supply chain is disrupted, you're talking within 120 to 180 days, possibly over 1 billion people facing starvation. Now that's one heck of a fantastic responsibility.
But that happens soon, we've got no show of replacing the technology at this rate.
Right. So at this time, we can pull the resources of each country of the world and say, gentlemen, just like we're making approaches in the Congress and everything for the monies and appropriations, we do the same thing. Say, hey, we need X amount of money to bring it in. If we get you behind us, if I come back over to New Zealand, and I'm not going to forget New Zealand, the Lord's not going to forget New Zealand, nor is he going to forget any other country. And so I believe it's going to be we're a conference that we're going to come together and say, this is what we need to do.
And we need to get ourselves on your list and figure out how much money we need to raise to get those.
Yes, and right. And then I'll send you the information on the dealerships and things like that.
Maybe we should also manufacture them under license here.
Yes. Well, the key is yes. And what we're doing is, for example, is designing master molds. Now, once the master molds are debugged, okay, that they're operating properly, then all we do is make copies of the master molds. And we send you copy molds, or I'll send you the drawings. and go to a machinist and say, make that exactly according to the specs. You see what I'm saying?
That's what we'd like to be doing soon, because we can start exploring all those avenues before anything comes off your production line.
Yeah. Well, yes, and that's what I need, because we're almost finalized with our work. Once that car's up and running, it's going to run continuously. We've designed it in a way for tremendous high performance and high performance reliability. The laser distributor, laser accelerator, its minimal operation hours 100,000 hours. So when you talk about conventional electronics, we got electronic circuits. I mean, it's been working for 23 to 40 some years without a malfunctioning. So we have high reliability systems approach.
I think that's the way we want to go.
Yeah.
Is setting up the manufacturing base straight away as soon as possible.
Yeah.
How long you anticipate being in New Zealand for currently?
Well, I think we'll be here maybe another 2 to 3 weeks. Hopefully see some of the sites.
Yeah. Sites to see.
Yeah. So maybe we can work it out, get some of your thoughts down on paper, and then we can get together before I go back. Because this is what I need.
What I would like to suggest now, if I could, not to close the meeting off or anything, but to make sure we do it, since we all more or less have an idea of what's happening here, and it's important that please stand, as echoed, so many things we opened the discussion with about decentralization, the money system, etc., is whether we can get a commitment towards a group of people right now, today, who are willing to take this further to the stage of committing to form an association. An idea that occurred to me, just to give it a buzz there, is something like the Exponential Energy Association of New Zealand, something like that. It could be anything. But something that gives us a chance to say, okay, we want to become a group that works in this town. I move that motion now. Does anybody would like to second it?
Why don't we call it Water Fuel Cell New Zealand?
Yeah, that's right. That's all we can call it, Water Fuel Cell New Zealand.
And just this, follow Stan's lead.
The name is irrelevant. All we want now is a commitment.
Yeah.
Do we want to move, that we start to
I second
find ourselves together?
Yes, absolutely.
Most definitely.
Fantastic.
All those who say aye.
So
Praise the
now-
Lord. We call
We
it
have
that.
passed the motion and we've formed the committee. Yeah, members all commit.
Have you got any travel plans worked out yet? Can we figure out a date and maybe set a business meeting up
Yeah.
on the way back through?
What I'm going to try to do is try to get some of the dealership manuals here.
Before you leave?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, what about the technical manuals of what you're doing? That's
Or we can send that to you later.
No, we'll send that to you later. There's some of the technology that I'm still clearing, and once I get it cleared,
Is there any help for one of us to come over and see you at Ohio?
at this stage of the game, no. Allow us to go on and finish our work and complete our paperwork, and once that's done, then we talk and we get together. And then I would say come, and then we'll sit down and discuss it. I love the fax machine.
No, it's great, isn't it? I got one at home.
Yeah. So if you got them, then we'll start faxing. That to me is the fastest and easy way to start to coordinate.
We best start working here and let you get on with your business stuff here.
Yeah.
Start to explore structures and problems. And I still think that the initial problems we talked about, let's not be naive, I still think the initial problems we talked about will have to be addressed. That is, that we're going to come up against a lot of opposition. And the steps to remedy that will have to be looked at. Government lobbying, etc. That will all have to form part of the discussion.
On behalf of everyone, Stan, I thank you very much for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you.